The first series of Torchwood was successful enough that it got promoted up from BBC 3 to BBC 2, so that meant more viewers, more prestige. By all accounts, it was a promotion. Russell T Davies, who was of course the writer, producer, showrunner that bought Doctor Who back in 2005 and created the Torchwood spin-off in the first place, he was even more hands-off with this second series than he was with the first series. In fact, his only outright writing credit on this second series is the very first 5 minutes of the premiere, which are really good, and it shows. So, the job of head writer fell to Chris Chibnall, who wrote a lot of the Series 2 episodes, and of course he eventually made Broadchurch, and then the Jodie Whittaker era of Doctor Who was all his. And whether it's because of his increased influence, or the general promotion up to the BBC 2, or it just being a second year and everyone being a bit more settled, things being a little less loosey-goosey and mad, Series 2 definitely feels a lot different than Series 1, I'd say. And of course, to discuss that, we'll be spoiling the 13 episodes of the second series of Torchwood, speaking about it, a decade after it aired now? Something like that. So, we may have different takes on the ways in which it felt different. For me, I think it felt a lot more structured and less unpredictable and idiosyncratic. It felt a lot more tropey with kind of Buffy-esque episodes like flashback episode, long lost evil relative episode, characters switch personalities episode, evil mirror image of the main character episode. And it felt a lot more arc-driven and less anything could happen this week, with like the big mid-season arc with Martha Jones and the breathing-challenged Owen and the Captain John Hart wraparounds of the series. So what did you guys think? How did Series 2 feel different from the first series to you?
Well, going into it, I didn't really know what to expect, so I knew nothing about Series 2 at all. And it was promised, the only thing I knew was that apparently the first 5 minutes of the first episode were great, and that wasn't a lie, they really were great. But on the whole, Series 2, it may upset certain people, but I really thought Series 2 was probably one of the best of Torchwood, because if you've listened to the previous podcast, you'd know that at that time I'd only seen Series 1. I have now seen up to and including Series 4, because I couldn't wait. So Series 2, I think it's just comfy. It is comfy as a sort of whole, and I don't mean like, obviously there's some sort of sad and horrible bits in it as well, but I just thought the character dynamics are sort of, I don't know, it feels more like a family in the way that Series 1 didn't, especially when they had Rhys on board and everything, and even though it was like sort of a very short time before everything sort of, went tits up, as they say, I thought it was really nice. And you have episodes like Something Borrowed, and God, I just love it. I don't have anything more exciting to say than I just really, really loved Series 2. That's all.
That's good input. And for the record, I love Series 2 as well. I love every series. I just love series more than some other series. I have a ranking, But Gig, what did you think of Series 2?
I think I agree that Series 2 has more of that family feel, and I think bringing Rhys on in particular is just transforms the show quite fundamentally and quite hugely. And of course you've got Martha's little cameo. It's all quite, I wouldn't say cozy, because you've got lots of kind of crazy, nasty stuff happening, but certainly it feels like the show has settled into somewhat of a groove, which has obviously its good sides, because it's comfy, but I think also kind of makes it feel a bit less unique, perhaps, and maybe individual stories are maybe not quite as exciting, thematically, as maybe in season 1. And maybe there's less of the season 1 stuff I think was just so absurdly cringy you just had to laugh, like in season 1's finale with all that stuff happening. There's less of that, although there's still some of it.
There's some, but in the finale, no less.
Yeah, in the whole, it's sort of like it's raised sort of the general bar for competence, but I find it maybe a bit less interesting on the whole than Series 1, but it's still got plenty of enjoyable stuff. Obviously, I love Something Borrowed as well. That's probably my favourite episode, and there's tons of stuff to like about it.
In terms of this comfy period, it's interesting because the whole season, the code's right, it definitely feels more homey, and characters are a lot more settled and more communicative with each other. But the actual, I think, peak period of comfiness is surprisingly short, because it's got to be after episode 4 Meet, so after Rhys knows about Torchwood and that's all opened up and everything. But it's got to be before episode 6 Reset, where, Owen fucking dies. So there's like one episode in the middle there, and then the sides of that, which could be, I don't know, weeks long or months long, where everyone's pretty happy, Jack and Yanto are pretty much in a relationship. Tosh and Owen are, they're
Tosh and Owen.
Yeah. And Gwen and Rhys are good, communicating and everything. No one's dead yet. That's a nice, happy little period. Lots of stories you can cram in there. But it's interesting because it feels like that lasted longer to me, years later. But it's actually quite a short little run of episodes where everything is pretty perfect.
I will say something about series 2. When you're talking about things like, the stories aren't maybe as, not necessarily out there, but, maybe more predictable. I don't know. I disagree, but then I've never seen anything like, for example, Buffy or whatever, so, I'm speaking from the perspective of someone who hasn't really seen many shows in this genre, aside from obviously the Primeval, but Primeval didn't really fall into this sort of format. So I thought it was new and fun and exciting, for me personally, and I suppose I would have a different opinion if I'd seen Buffy and had that sort of point of comparison or something along those lines. But I have this terrible thing where, and someone will probably get upset at me for it, but I don't really care about plots. Well, I do, but to an extent. If it's a really shit plot, I will be like, oh, this is really shit, I don't like it. But see, if it's sort of mediocre, or the plot itself, if you sort of removed all the character stuff from it and just looked at the story itself, and it was passable, it wasn't really bad, but it wasn't really standout or amazing either, I'd be like, I love this, as long as there's character moments in it, as long as there's bits in it that I can sit back, that, there's funny bits or heartwarming bits or even just sad bits, just something that pushes the characters forward. And I feel like Series 2 did that, and even when it wasn't necessarily pushing them forward, the point that they were at, which is that sort of family dynamic, and obviously it didn't entirely last, but even when there was sort of tragedy stuff going on, you still had that sort of, there was a sort of different feel to it than in Series 1, because everyone was sort of comfortable with each other. So I genuinely didn't mind that it wasn't the most innovative series. I just really, really loved where the team was at, and I really loved sort of the interactions, and I certainly loved the sort of Owen, sort of 3-parter, I guess, or 2-parter and a one-off, if we're going by one distinction. But I just thought it was great on the character front, so I really can't fault it.
What you're saying about character plot distinction there reminds me of a thread I saw on r.t.d.com a few weeks ago, where people were trying to rank, this was in the books, like web zone, whatever you want to call it, people were trying to rank how much they cared about or what they thought was most important in a book, and the criteria were plot, character, themes, and world building. And of course, because it was r.t.d., world building was at the top of most of them or whatever. But I agree with you that plot and world building I don't care that much about. They're window dressing to me. Plots are a dime a dozen. Any writer can come up with a heap of plots, and there's been a heap of plots already written. We're always going to get derivative plots just because that's how it goes. But unique characters or very detailed characters and well-realized themes, interesting themes, I find that a lot more engaging to myself.
I'll take it, as long as there's good character moments, and as long as they're, and I do agree with the sort of theme thing. I really love stories that have themes, but I've noticed that themes tend to, oh god, don't bring that up. I'm still traumatised. But I think themes are also, you can sort of build them up without even the plot stuff, so, having just the characters be there, and I don't know, I just love all the character details, and I love the character details in Torchwood, and I just love the characters, so yeah.
I want the plot to work, but I'm often not going to notice little wobbly bits, because I'm about the timey-wimey, not the wibbly-wobbly, you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, because it's when you're watching a show like Torchwood or Doctor Who, certainly, or just anything in that sort of genre, I guess, you're not really watching it expecting it to be airtight in terms of the actual logistical stuff of it. If you go in expecting that, it's I don't know if it's the show for you, really, because it's there will be points that it's a bit funny and it doesn't necessarily hold up to sort of scrutiny. I think there's also, again, there's a sort of limit to how much you can tolerate. There does have to be a point where things have to sort of make sense on the surface. If they start to fall apart a little bit, or not necessarily fall apart, but be a bit shaky if you like sort of sit there and really, really think about them, then it's not so okay. But I think as long as they broadly make sense, and I'm not going to bring up Series 11, but I think Series 11 is a point where it's like you look at it too much and it's not just shaky, it's like it's got nothing going for it at all. So but in terms of like Torchwood and stuff, there's no points in that I can think of where you're like, oh, this doesn't even, on first look, it doesn't make sense at all. I don't get that. I don't get that at all.
With a show like Torchwood and Doctor Who, I feel like they throw the audience several bones. Like, we have a drug here called retcon, which can literally make characters forget anything. And, Doctor Who is like, oh, it was a paradox. Oh, the Time War erased it. Like, these shows constantly throw us things saying, look, it's all a little bit messy and we're going to introduce something in your head so you can go, oh, these two things that don't fit actually fit. Because they're much more interested in just coming up with new stories than trying to interlock everything into like this big tapestry of everything sequentially working together perfectly. Like, they're constantly saying to you, look, we're giving you the tools so in your head you can go, oh, these contradict, but whatever, that's cool. Which is needed, and it's a good thing they do this. And I don't think every fan is as amenable to that, but the writers are certainly indicating that we're more interested in generating stories than making our stories fit with past ones. Although this is a pretty continuity heavy series. Even in terms of actors, I noticed in the finale we had the same doctor at the hospital that was in like Sleeper earlier in the series, and then the John Hart stuff at the beginning end. This is much more of a continuity focused series than the first one, but even then that's not like making sure every plot fits perfectly into the other one. It's just that there's more of a week to week is building somewhere in this series.
They probably couldn't afford extra actors.
That's a very good point.
You've also got the Resurrection Gauntlet coming back from Series 1 as well. That's sort of pivotal in the whole Owen thing.
Well, weirdly enough, I was watching the Declassified, and in Series 8, no, not Series 8, Episode 8 of Series 1, and they have the line at the end where Yanto goes, oh, that's the thing about gloves, they always come in pairs. Russell T Davies actually wrote that line, so they were always intending to have the additional glove story, and maybe it would never have come up, there's every chance that they could have just thrown that in, but I think Russell saw an opportunity, and whether they knew I don't think they knew at this point necessarily what the plots they were going to have for Series 2, but Russell T Davies threw that line in there just in case, because I think there's a lot of potential with that sort of idea, having a resurrection glove, and certainly they did use it.
It stings, because at the start I said there were only 5 minutes Russell T Davies wrote in this whole series, but since Yanto reprises that line, I just built up a house of lies that you just toppled.
Yeah.
There was an extra line in an episode this series.
He did set that up for Series 2. Also, like I said, I don't know if that was the intention, what they did with Owen, or as it was originally going to be, Yanto. But yeah, he did have sort of the intention of bringing the Resurrection Glove back, which was pretty cool. And it was a different prop. That's the word.
Plot.
It was a different prop. Okay, that's all I'm gonna say. The glove was spikier this time.
I've always thought, in David Tennant's very last episode special, The End of Time, Part 2, 2010, New Year's Day, where Timothy Dalton's Rassilon Time Lord President has that gauntlet he's zapping everyone with. How similar are the props? Because I've always just assumed they probably recycled them, or are they different gauntlets?
No, they're different. They're different. I think they're different, like sort of metals and stuff, and also they're different. I think they're broadly similar, but I don't think they're recycled. I can't confirm that. I would need to look it up. But I remember the reason I did look it up when I was watching Series 1 is because I was like, this is really strange. I remember a metal gauntlet that had a lot of strange powers. I wonder if that has any connection to Rassilon at all. I looked it up, and no, it didn't. Somehow I managed to avoid spoiling myself for Series 2 when I was doing that, so good on me. But yeah, I don't think there's any connection there at all, even in terms of reusing props. But maybe someone listening will actually go look this up and prove me wrong. So
this is it's one of those Russell T Davies hallmark. things he likes playing around with, societies descending into fascism, soap operas colliding with genre fiction, and spiky gauntlets.
On the topic of how the Owen death plotline connects with the series 1, actually, one thing that I think is quite funny is that I think in the middle of that, in Dead Man Walking, they bring back the thing from series 1 about how there's something moving in the darkness after death, that thing that Susie said. And I think what's funny about that is that in series 1, it seems to be quite plainly gesturing at the series finale with Abaddon popping up. But in series 2, they cheekily kind of say, actually, we weren't talking about that rubbish CGI monster from series 1. We were talking about this rubbish CGI monster from series 2, which is, Death, sort of the spooky skeleton who appears in the cloud of stuff. So, and I think that's a good retcon, because it certainly looks better, and it makes more sense for that to be kind of lurking in the void. But, it's funny, it's interesting.
You know what's wild about this Owen stuff? You know how we start saying those demonic lines, Malekith Abal and all that? Those are verbatim from a 70s fantasy book I've read. Those are literally pulled directly out of the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, it's called. Exact same words. Different meaning. Oh. But yeah, they just pulled those words outright as a
deep
homage.
Lore.
It's not theft when it's literally exactly the same.
Oh, that also reminds me of something else in Declassified. When they were designing the set and stuff, and you know how in Jack's office, I was about to say John's office there. Anyway, in Jack's office, they have the safe and the thing that you put the boxes in. You put the boxes in that you've got the stuff, and it goes into the archives.
For the smaller boxes.
The big box for the smaller boxes. It's like a lift for boxes, and they put the archive stuff in there, and it goes down, presumably, hopefully, to the archive. That was apparently it was basically a copy of a thing in Ghostbusters. I can't recall right now, but that's apparently what they said in Declassified. And when the guy who was sort of designing the set described it when they were wanting to build it, so they pointed out that it was basically a copy of something in Ghostbusters, and they were like, just say it's a homage, just say we're deliberately referencing it, because he didn't realise at the time that it was a copy.
You know what's tricky with that is one of the Ghostbusters is in Torchwood Series 4. Ernie Hudson is in Miracle Day, so it's one of those things,
God,
like Torchwood Series 1 references Alien, and then we get John Hurt ostensibly playing a doctor come the Doctor Who 50th. So all these little universe breaking things, it's all very, very...
It's all connected.
Yeah.
All of it. Oh, God. This also, because we were speaking about the death plot, I think it would probably be good, because I want to know your thoughts on this. The fact that, so if anyone doesn't know, the Owen death plot, before the scripts were written, it was originally going to be Yanto dying and being resurrected. And I don't know how different it would have been, because also the scripts didn't exist when this change happened, because they had told Gareth that this was going to be, the plot for Series 2. But then at some point they decided, no, this doesn't make sense, we should shift it over to Owen, and I sort of agree with that, but get into that in a moment. So we don't actually know how it would have all fit together. I think the Joseph Lidster episode would have been broadly the same, because they make a reference to a woman called, I don't know what her name was in the episode. Maybe it was kept the same, but there's like a sort of a magazine article that references a woman called Maggie, and yeah, so those essentially the only things we know about the Yanto death plot was that there was going to be a scene with the team in the supermarket dealing with some rift stuff, and while they're all running about doing whatever, Yanto's standing there looking dejected, and Jack is filling up the trolley with like tons of food. And then there was going to be another scene, Jack and Yanto dancing together, and it was apparently referenced a scene with this woman called Maggie and Yanto dancing together. So whether that'd be like sort of Maggie, like, because also it's like the sort of it's the anti-suicide episode essentially. So whether that Maggie would have been the woman on the roof and then Yanto danced with her, and there would be a sort of like reference to that when he's dancing with Jack, who knows. But anyway, this supermarket plot would then connect up to later in the episode, Yanto goes back to the hub and he finds it all candlelit and everything, and Jack has cooked him a meal, and he essentially says to him that just because you're dead doesn't mean you can't still enjoy life, or something like that. I'm really paraphrasing here, but so that's basically all we know about this Yanto death plot, and I think it's largely coming from what Joseph Lidster would have wrote for it. I hope I'm saying his name right.
Yeah, I believe that's his name. I mean,
yeah,
that's the pronunciation of his name.
Yeah, good. So that's all we know, and also it's interesting because they were planning to have a meal when we know that dead people can't eat, but that doesn't really matter at this point.
Mean,
I don't think they'd figured out the details.
Well, maybe...
then.
You know how Owen has a beer and then he deals with it? Maybe Yanto is just that committed to cuisine.
Oh no. But he can't taste anything, can he? He can't. Because he can't feel. But God only knows where that was meant to go. It would have been a really sweet scene, but like I said, like they hadn't written any scripts. This was sort of like very early on. But also what I was trying to ask by explaining all this was like, do you think that that sort of plot, given that we don't really know how it would have played out exactly, do you think it would have worked having Yanto be the one to die rather than Owen, or do you think that it was a good call to change it to Owen?
I really only think it could have worked for Owen. Like if we look down the list of characters, Jack, obviously it won't work. Gwen, it just doesn't make sense. She's the main character. You can't kill her off. That'd be ridiculous. It'd be so ridiculous. Tosh, it doesn't work because she already has no life. I love Tosh. She's my favourite of the 5 at this time, but, it would effectively mean nothing, for her in terms of the characterization because she already isn't really living. Like, that's so much of the point of her in this series. Yanto, I feel like killing, like... At this point where Jack is, comparatively quite new to having like this proper relationship where he's really sharing with someone, killing that person off, even to make him a zombie, just feels like pointless. It's like wasting what they could develop further, and they do with that relationship.
Yeah.
But Owen...
yeah, sorry.
What were you going to say? Yeah.
I was just going to say on that point, it's like also the fact that they were in a relationship at this point, and as they showed with Owen, and again, whether they would have went ahead with this with Yanto, Owen can't like feel anything or certainly do anything, so it would have been unfortunate, especially with Jack and Yanto, because Jack is so tactile, so yeah. I don't know, I think that would have put a sort of major roadblock in the relationship. Not necessarily something they couldn't get over, but it would be, it'd be too complicated essentially to do it with Yanto. And I'll continue what you were going to say.
Well, it has maximum impact and drama and conflict on Owen because he's so hedonistic, and he's so into, like, as he's saying at the start of the season, he says to Tosh he's like winding down and he's having less one night stands and things because it's all feeling a bit older to him. To like magnify and amplify that with him outright dying is such an interesting way to really zero in on how the character was developing, and to like take away his agency and say, okay, you were mellowing out a bit, we'll mellow you out completely, how do you feel now? It works so much better for his characterization. And Bern Gorman, who already looks a bit like a zombie, just plays it so well. He absolutely nails it. And it was good to give him something to do, because arguably he may even be the best actor of the 5 there, and he needed more material and more range to play in the second series, I think, and it really got that, even if so much of it was screaming underwater and that kind of thing. He could sell that where some of the other actors couldn't, I reckon.
That screaming underwater scene, actually, again, I was watching Declassified because that's how I refreshed my memory on series 2. I felt bad for burning that because they had to, so they actually made him, so when he was like running along the pier thingy, and he actually did jump in himself, he had a wetsuit on and everything, he jumped into Cardiff Bay, and apparently supposedly they did test the water, make sure it was safe, no pathogens or whatever. Anyway, he jumped in, but also they filmed, how when he's screaming underwater and everything, they also filmed that in a swimming pool, but because Owen was playing, obviously, the fact that he was dead at this point, they had to do so many takes to get the perfect one with those least amount of bubbles possible when he was screaming, because obviously like he can't breathe, so they had to keep dunking Byrne underwater every single time until they finally got a shot that worked. And I was like, honestly, how rubbish would that be? But it worked out in the end, and I think it's like a sort of really powerful moment, I guess, for the character. And I agree that Byrne is like, he is an amazing actor, and I think he did did really well as Owen. And I agree with your sort of point, like, you know, how they make the point of saying that he's sort of winding down in terms of like that sort of hedonistic lifestyle. But then he gets forced to, and I think he really struggles with that, because where before it was a sort of choice, now he doesn't have that choice, and he's sort of rebelling against it. Is because he did sort of want to settle down, like you get that feeling that he sort of wanted to settle down, but even that's taken away from him, because regardless of anything, he can't feel, he can't eat, he can't be normal. You know, he's just like stuck like this. So even though those like and I think it manifests in sort of him, I guess, in a sense, freaking out at Tosh, because obviously he's struggling with this, and Tosh wants to make him feel normal, but, you know, how do you sort of do that in that situation? He's dead. You know, how are you going to make him feel better? There's no way to fix this.
It's that great romantic irony of the series. It's like in the very first episode, when they're scoping out that warehouse on the runaround, Captain John Hart's given them, Owen's saying to Tosh, I need to find a nice woman to settle down. And she's like, you know, because she very much wants to be that woman. And then, like he says in the finale, they just kept missing each other, even though they got close in this episode, in this series, to nearly having it work out. Like, Owen flat out agrees to the date at some point when he realizes it's a date, but they just never quite got there. And I think a big theme of this series in particular, this second series, is how much openly communicating instantly benefits a relationship. Like we see in Meet, when Rhys is finally brought into the fold, he calms so much down, and he's so much more, he just wanted to know what Gwen was up to and what Gwen was doing and everything. As soon as he knows that, he's instantly so much less I don't want to say overbearing, because I think he was fairly reasonably bearing, to be honest, but you know what I mean. And in Adrift, where he verges out, he gets really quite angry at her in the park scene, where she says stop wittering, because he's trying to have a conversation about work or whatever, and she's stuck on the missing boy. And I think he does go too far there. But at the end, when he says to her, okay, share everything about your day with me, where before he was saying no, leave work at work, their relationship improves so much there again. So the Owen Tosh thing, I think, is another big example, although a much more tragic example, that you should really communicate what you're feeling pronto to other people, and then there's much less of a chance of missing each other. But Gig, did you have much input on this Owen death arc? Do you think it would have worked without the great music Owen has for dying?
Well, I think, I also do not think it would have worked with the Anto. I think it's just so Owen to have. He's the angsty secondary male lead. I know Ianto has his fair share of angst in series 1, but he's on the whole, he seems mellower. Like, I know he shoots Owen as well in series 1, but I still just get more of a sense of Owen as that one who has to sort of go through this kind of purging, like this gauntlet of like suffering and torment and screams underwater and all that stuff. There's just so much more Owen, and yeah, the music is excellent. I mean, it's probably, when it comes to that scene where Owen battles with death, the music is probably the thing that's holding it all together, because I'm not sure what else is. Like, certainly, it's just, there's so many interesting decisions in that scene.
It's a series 1 moment. It's one of the rare series 1 moments in series 2, and that it's just utterly... Terrible feels like the wrong word. It's just utterly insane. I can't believe this was on television. He's grappling with the CGI death, and it looks so fake, and it's this hugely overwrought music, and he's like literally fighting a CGI skeleton. It's insane. Yeah.
No, I agree. I mean, it is very series 1. I mean, at the same time, Owen's whole fight with death is like, it's insane and baffling in that way, because you don't really understand, like, why does fighting it work? Like, how kind of crap is it? But I mean, I realise it's a skeleton, it's just, and it ends up just sort of dissolving in kind of a little puff of CGI effects in Owen's hands. And so it's one of the things where it's not just visually weird, but also, like, narratively it's strange as well, and a bit hard to get a grip on. But that episode in general, the second half of it, is so full of weirdness like that. Like his little speech to the boy with leukemia about how the ones who survive this disease are the ones who have the will to beat death, and I'm going to inspire you to beat death. You have to hold on. But between that and Day in the Death, Owen seems to get these kind of very special episode moments, doesn't he? Where he sort of encourages people in the real world to struggle on and hold on to life.
Well, when they're on BBC Two, they can't exactly have sex gas monsters anymore. They need to have a little more lessons for everyone watching. It's much more important and watch television at this point.
I noticed that if you compare it to Series 1 and how the two seasons treat death, with Series 1 you have the Jack helping the guy in Out of Time commit suicide, and Series 2 you have all this stuff about like don't commit suicide. It's like death is you need to cling to life. You need to, so it's very sort of like it's Series 2 is trying to make the argument for life, where Series 1 is sort of more fixated on the horror of kind of the void.
Yeah, it's very much worth noting it's not a closed conversation, because the next two series, especially Series 4, really keep probing that question.
They're really obsessed with death, aren't they, over at Torchwood? You can't get over it.
The man who lives forever, what else would he be thinking about?
Yeah, it's the ultimate sort of question, especially for Jack, because Jack doesn't truly know death. Ironically, even though he dies all the time, he doesn't have that sort of permanent state. So,
speaking of death, that episode where that ends with Owen fighting death, it's weird because the first half of it works for me in that, like, Torchwood investigating occult stuff when they're looking in old books and the Black Plague or science fictiony stuff. It has to be 12. All that stuff works for me. I think a kind of supernatural Torchwood, I'm with it. I like Peter J. Hammond's episodes that do kind of supernaturally, not very science fictiony stuff. That's all working for me. But then when it gets so literal and it's actually like death, it's actually like Thanatos in a CGI skeleton and he's coming out fighting people and literally like killing people in hospitals. Just, you went so literal, you made it smaller, and then it doesn't feel creepy and mysterious because where's the mystery? We're actually looking at death and he looks shit and he's walking around pointing at people and, there's a boy playing cancer. There's a boy playing. That bit's getting dropped. Forget that bit. But yeah, you get the point that it goes too literal, and which is weird because they made the exact same mistake in the Series 1 finale where we get the son of Satan strolling around Cardiff and he's this big dog-looking demon, and it's just, even if the CGI was great, it's what is the show doing? Like it's the whole point is it's even smaller scale than Doctor Who. It's weevils running around Cardiff. It's, drama, soap opera-ish drama between the characters. But when you actually get the personification of death waltzing around and getting in a toss-up with Bern Gorman, it's just missing the point of what this show works at doing.
The detail of it that I find just the most ridiculous is that twist where Ianto is researching it and he finds out, and they ask him what stopped death when it happened originally, and he says, "Oh, it was stopped by Faith." And then we find out at the end that it was a girl called Faith who stopped it. It's like, come on, guys.
I feel like the problem I think is also bringing death in and having death be a physical presence is that Torchwood is so sort of human, and it's so human, and it plays upon these sort of human fears of death. So to have death be a physical thing that you can beat, it's like it takes you out of the story, because it's like, I don't really know how they would have, dealt with the rest of that episode, sort of the second half, I guess. I've got no ideas on how they could have made it better. I would need to sit and think about that, but I do think that the idea of bringing death there and having him be walking about with his bones on the show, like, that was a bit silly, because it's like, death is meant to be this sort of unknowable thing. It's like a force, not necessarily a creature or a person, or at least that's the sort of human take on it. God knows sci-fi and fantasy does it a bit differently, but to sort of have it there physically, just, I don't know, it's so hard to sort of relate to, in a sense. Not that it's not like something that it's not a situation you'd live through anyway or die through, but I don't know, just this doesn't make sense. Sorry, I'm kind of rambling here, but just, death is meant to be something we're not really meant to comprehend. That's why they can sort of get so many seasons out of discussing it and exploring it, because it's this, for us, it is the end. It is the great unknowable thing that nobody ever actually knows what death is, and that's why there's so many stories throughout all time just trying to make sense of it. But the point of the point of death as a concept is we can't make sense of it, And you're not supposed to, because if you make the moment you make sense of it, it's too late, you know. So I don't know. I just feel like making it too real was like taking it to a level where you can no longer relate to it on a human point of view.
It's wisely dropped after Owen punches him hard enough. Which can you imagine in the finale, like after Tosh dies, if we're transported to that black shapeless realm and there's a skeleton there and she's got to like fight it hard enough and then she jumps back into her body. Like, I'm very glad they completely dropped it. But for all that death arc, I think was worth it, because the third episode of it, A Day in the Death, the 8th episode, the one that's framed with Owen and that woman, suicidal bride on the roof, written by Joseph Lidster, who wrote the audio drama Broken we talked about in the first podcast. And this episode also has the word broken said all the time in it, in a very declarative way. I thought that episode... He's
advertising his audio 10 years in advance.
It was all a very long game. But I thought that episode was... It possibly bit off a bit more than it could chew, and the end of it, the very strong anti-suicide stuff, like, I mean, cool, that's good, but it felt a little bit incongruent with Torchwood. But I think that was quite a strong episode. And it's interesting because it actually reminds me a lot of a radio play, of an audio drama, of which he'd already written plenty before this episode was made. He'd done plenty of Doctor Who ones, but in that it's framed by basically a two-hander, two characters on a roof, and they're both explaining, events of their recent weeks to each other, and then they're like expositing about the points of them. So it's all very shut your eyes and the episode would still make quite a bit of sense, like a certain other series we were talking about earlier. But I think it works. I think it works really well. It doesn't feel too clunky because it's very thematically direct what it's doing, but it has soul. It's very emotionally grounded. I love that scene in it where Tosh comes around to Owen's place with a pizza and a beer, and Owen's, having his depressive freak out, and she's withering away, to use Gwen's words, and eventually it gets too much for him and he explodes at her, and he's like saying, I can't just be your, you can't just emotionally use me now. I'm safe now, aren't I? It's all cozy and romantic because, there's no risk to it anymore. And he's calling out the weirdness of how she always loved him but watched him, go sleep with other women and never asked him out until fairly late in the time, and says, I have nothing to give you. Maybe you want someone screwed up as you. Do you want to see me broken? Breaks off his finger. I think that's all just such strong character material between the two of them. It's really dark stuff, and it's not gooey, and it's not nice, and they're being mean to each other in a lot of ways and using each other, but it just works so damn well. Really, really fine episode, really fine scene in that. But the more dramatic bits of it, like him jumping in the water, they definitely needed that music and stuff. But there's a lot of nice, quiet character moments in that episode. I thought it worked really quite well.
I like that bit between Tosh and Owen, and I sort of portrayal of everyone in Torchwood as just a bit fucked up, because how could you not be after doing a job like this? You're not going to be entirely together. So, as much as it was a sort of heartbreaking scene, because what Owen was saying to Tosh, and also you don't want to see them upset, but to sort of have them sort of poke at each other and sort of wind each other up and just not be perfect humans. Like, this isn't just about that scene, but just Torchwood in general, where you see the characters mess up so often, and it's ways that you sort of again can relate to, because everyone's going to have moments where maybe they say something really mean to someone they really care about, or and maybe those things that they're saying maybe the things that they're saying, you realise they're true and everything, and it I don't know, just something about Torchwood just feels realer in a sense, because it's so raw, and because it doesn't pull any punches when it comes to stuff like that.
Or to death.
Yeah. I don't know, I just felt like the Owen arc was just really, really strong on that front, like showing how flawed and broken not just Owen is, but also maybe the people around him. Listen to Broken now. Go a Big Finish. Order it right now. Great audio drama. Joseph Lidster's, love it. But yeah, it's so good, and I just that's another reason why I think it, again, like, not to really bring it right back, but it just wouldn't work as well with Yanto, because you sort of need to, you kind of need to use the sort of most flawed character in your team, and I'm not saying that necessarily, like, you know, they've all got flaws and everything, but Owen is the one you look at from the very start. You know, series 1, he introduces himself actually with the unfortunate date rape scene. So he does have a sort of, in the sort of viewer consciousness, he has maybe the most obviously flawed one, probably because he doesn't hide it as well as the others. So to have him be the sort of centerpiece in that sort of story was the right choice, I think. I don't think any other character could have pulled it off as well as him.
Yeah, I think everything you're saying is why when Tosh and Owen die, well, Tosh dies, Owen dies again for good in the finale, it hurts so much because these aren't finished people or finished characters. These aren't complete characters. They're not, like, there's no character arc all neatly lined up and finished. There's no, these people were great people and it's really sad they died. They were fuck-ups and, you know, they screwed things up a lot, but that they feel like real people for that. So when they die, it hurts because, oh shit, these were, you know, 3-dimensional people and they never got to do so-and-so. They never got to go on a date. They still had developing to do, but they died. You know, like, if someone dies around 30, they're not done with their life. They're not done growing. They're just ripped out from the world. And that's why it hurts so much in the finale, because, you know, as much as the remaining 3 will try and move on, Tosh and I will never get to move on. They never get to keep growing, and it's you know, so sad for all that.
That's actually a really good point. Honestly, like, the idea that sort of Torchwood just sort of cuts it short, like, because in so many stories, it's so common that death is something used to sort of tie a little bow on a character's story. Like, okay, we've done everything we possibly can, we've developed this character to the furthest we can develop them, now there's only one way for them to go, and that's to be written out. So and that's so common. It's like this idea that death only does come when it is, you know, when you've got no other option.
2 days away from retirement kind of thing.
Yeah, so it's like so. And also, like, that's the sort of most satisfying deaths in fiction. Well, I say satisfying in quotes. I think the Owen and Tosh thing is satisfying in its own right, even if it's more acutely upsetting in a way. But the sort of satisfying deaths in fiction tend to be the ones that do, you know, they're like the end of a story. You know, they sort of finish it off. It's the last page. You know, you're all done. You've seen the character's life, and even if it's not, like, you know, even if they're not lived into old age, you've at least seen the completion of a character arc. Tosh and Owen, it's more like they die at the start of that sort of development in a way. I mean, not to say they didn't develop before, but, you know what I mean, they were sort of opening a sort of new chapter, I guess, if we're going to use the book analogy again. They're opening sort of this new chapter where they're starting to sort of open up to each other, and they're starting to, like, further the relationship and stuff, but then it's just so abruptly and so cruelly cut short. But again, that all ties into the idea that Torchwood is more real, because in real life, when people die, you don't get this satisfying ending. Oh, like, 9 times out of 10, really, you don't get a satisfying ending. It is just a life cut short, and there's so much more they could have done and all this stuff.
So much more.
So much more. But I feel like that's again something that people can relate to more than that sort of satisfying death sort of approach, because chances are there will be people watching and who have experiences with things like that. And I'm not necessarily saying the Tosh and Owen thing is cathartic, but it's certainly something that feels more real and feels more understandable.
Yeah,
because
it's spurred me on to watch more, for sure.
Yeah, it's a more realistic approach to things, and as horrible and as sad as it is, but I think it worked for them, and it worked for Torchwood.
To pivot from those 3, you know, lots of meat on the bone to discuss Owen episodes and the finale.
Yes.
I want to look at episode 10, From Out of the Rain. So this was written by Peter J. Hammond, who wrote a famous right word, who wrote a distinctive show called Sapphire and Steel, and he wrote Small Worlds in Torchwood Series 1. And it's an episode, I think, with a lot less to say, because it sits very oddly in the series. It comes at that weird point where we've had that whole Owen death arc, and we've had the wedding episode, and then we're about to have, you know, the flashback episode and the, you know, evil relative Cain and Abel episode. And then we've just got this kind of it almost feels like it belongs in series 1 because the characters feel a lot less detailed in it. And it's just about a very procedural, you know, monster of the week kind of thing about these night travelers that are coming out of the screens, and Jack's talking about, oh, cinema got rid of the night travelers, and Ianto's taking Gwen and Owen to like an old short film, which it feels so weird to me. I don't really buy that would happen. And we've got stuff like they do this thing where they like take us back 100 years or whatever in Cardiff to this old traveling circus thing outside, and they do a pretty good job with like the sets and the props and the extras for it, but they apply absolutely no color grading to it. So you don't realize this is meant to be set in the past because it just looks the same. You know, we viewers are very dumb. We need the colors to look different to understand that it's at a different time period. If I'm in Mexico, I need the screen all yellow. If I'm 100 years ago in Cardiff, I need the colors washed out. And they do this in the finale when Jack and John Hart go to like 27 AD, they wash out the colors and they desaturate it a lot more. And I'm like, oh, cool. You know, you didn't even need to put the 27 AD on the screen. I get that this is in the past. This episode didn't do that. And it's just a little thing that maybe it was intentional to kind of confuse us, but it bugs me a little bit. But anyway, Gig, what did you think of this episode in particular? Because I know you've seen Sapphire and Steel, some of it, so you're a bit more familiar with the writer than me and Code.
I've watched 2 serials from it, and I think it does sort of give quite a useful perspective on PJ Hammond's episodes, because they're basically ones where he puts the idea before the fact it's Torchwood. Like PJ Hammond, you get the sense he doesn't really give a shit about the fact it's Torchwood. He's just here to write a story about some crazy supernatural shit happening. And the phenomenon in From Out of the Rain is very similar to the sort of thing you get on Sapphire and Steel, because that show is about anomalies in time and these kind of strange, slightly mythic, slightly eerie events happening, which get investigated by these 2 lead characters who are not very heavy in the character department. They're completely unlike sort of Torchwood leads. Actually, the inhumanity of the main characters is part of how the show works. You're kind of scared of them. You don't really get much of an insight into their heads. So yeah, his episodes, certainly when it comes to the main team, maybe, PJ Hammond, he's maybe interested in Jack as an immortal, but when it comes to the others like Ianto and so on, like, he's just like, they're tools for him to use, not so much like the engine of the story. So, and this thing that we get in From Out of the Rain, this idea of like these people in a piece of old film that are kind of trying to break out into the modern world and have kind of passed their time. They're essentially a ghost story, ghosts in piece of old media. I think it is an interesting idea in itself, and I think it's maybe not flashy enough to sustain an entire episode of Torchwood on it, and but I think it's nice in some ways for the show to get to do an episode that's just about an idea and isn't quite that worried about the other aspects, but it's sort of annoying as well for reasons you specify. So I think it doesn't bug me too much, but you can.
And I think also it feels like a very series 1 episode because of the sort of, not really revelation, but the Jack discovery that was in the circus and stuff, but specifically the moment where Ianto notices him in the film and he's like, oh my god, that's Jack. And that would have been more like, gasp, it's Jack, he's in the old film, if it had been in series 1, and maybe not for the viewers, but certainly for the team, because this was also before they knew, like series 1 was before they knew he was immortal, aside from Gwen, and even then she didn't really know the full extent of it. So to have a series 2 episode where they're like, oh my god, Jack is in this old timey film, and also it's not really played out as being a big shock as things go on. Just having that moment of realisation and Ianto being surprised by it, it's kind of like, on one hand, yeah, it's a bit of a surprising thing. You're seeing your boss, and effectively your boyfriend, in this old circus thingy, whatchamacallit, cinema film thingy. But I just feel like, why are they so shocked by that? Of course he lived back then, I don't know. It just feels so disjointed in so many ways, and I don't really care for the story, like the plot of it. I really thought it was like half baked. I could see the idea there. I could see it, and it could have maybe been interesting or good or scary or something, but it just kind of fell flat for me, and there was no real character moments in it that made me go, oh, this justifies its existence, because at least, the rest of it was a bit silly and a bit not good, but at least we had this one scene or whatever. We don't really have that. I mean, those little things, I guess, I could point at and go, yeah, that was quite good, and I did I did sort of like learning more about Jack and sort of just those scenes when they're watching the film together, but it wasn't anything revolutionary or anything. What
about
really
when
pushed
Jack
the
gives that kid the breath at the end? Isn't that revolutionary enough for you?
I mean, I like that from a sort of character standpoint in a sense, because it's like, I mean, it was a nice little scene, and I kind of liked how it ended in a way where they didn't save everyone, because it's like,
yeah.
It's like a sort of it's such a Torchwood subversion of something that could be a Doctor Who story.
Well, it's funny you say that, because it's a case of retroactive foreshadowing. In Jack giving that boy the breath is then later, retcon foreshadowed in The End of the World in Doctor Who Series 1, where the Ninth Doctor goes, "My gift is air from my lungs," and the face of Bo is in the room where that happens. So have a keen eye, viewers, for these kind of connections.
Oh God. No, I don't think that's a connection there, Neil, but you can dream. But yeah, I thought it was interesting from the perspective that, again, they didn't save anyone. In fact, they only saved one child, and of course the other child died, and other people died. I think there's other children, in fact, aside from those just two. So it was a sort of really, really bittersweet ending, and again, it's sort of as contrasted against something like I can't necessarily imagine a sort of one-off silly circus episode to end in a way like that on Doctor Who. I couldn't possibly imagine it. I mean, it could happen, but on Torchwood it feels more natural, where they're kind of struggling and they can't always win.
When we're talking natural, for me, I mean, this sounds silly because series 3 and 4 and 5 and 6, which kind of exist, are so not in this trend. But when I think of Torchwood, I really think of a Peter J. Hammond episode. So I think of a kind of mystical episode that dispenses from the science fiction stuff and tells us very old-fashioned kind of magic-y story in, the fairy episode in series 1 and the Travelers episode in this series. And then I also think a real Torchwood hallmark, even though this only happened, in a third of the Torchwood series that are out, are the dual episodes written by Catherine Tregenna, who, for my money, is the best writer Torchwood had for the first 2 series at least. And she does very well-written episodes and very character-heavy, very zeroing on character development and characterization episodes. So what she did in series 1 were Captain Jack Harkness, where we see the man Jack took his name after, and Out of Time, which I'd say is the best episode of series 1, where Jack kills himself in a car with some dude and Owen falls in love with the pilot and all that. And so in this series, she wrote what I can test is kind of a 2-parter, although I know both of you disagree. She wrote Adam. No, that's the second one. She wrote Meat and Adam. So Meat, I love this episode so much. This is the one where there's like this whale thing that's alive and people are cruelly carving meat out of it while it's living. Shades of Countryside burgers at the start there that discuss the team. But so we've even got a shot of pizza, like a meat lover's pizza in this episode, and the team being disgusted by it, picking off the toppings. Very similar. But anyway, so it's this great episode where, there's all that plot about the creature, and that's all very important, and it's really tied in the morality of the episode and everything. Especially because this series really hones in on Jack's thing where Jack really hates killing. He's cool with putting stuff in the hub. What do you call them? The vaults things? The archives? Whatever. He really likes putting stuff in there, be it, his brother, himself, this creature, if he could have got a big enough one maybe, for a nice chilled, watery coffin. Well, you know what I'm saying. Because we have this thing in the finale, or in these flashback episode, in fragments, where Torchwood 100 years ago just shot the blowfish dude, and Jack's like, what the fuck? You can put him in prison, that's fine, but you can't just wipe out someone's life. Perhaps this is because he sees, life is so important. I've got so much of it. It's given me this perspective. Jack's very much about people have to live. And so in this episode, he really has to grapple with that because Owen and stuff are saying we need to euthanize this creature. There's no way we can help it. Actually, Owen might agree with him. Someone agrees with him in this episode that they shouldn't euthanize it, that they should try and find a way for it to live. But he has to grapple with that.
Owen
Is it
prepares to euthanize. No, Owen prepares to euthanize it.
That's right. So there's that big moral quandary of, when a creature's in immense suffering and we're not sure if we can make things better for it, do we euthanize it or do we let it live in pain for a while, as if we can see if we can improve its life somewhat or whatever. But the main focus of the episode isn't this. It's Rhys seeing Gwen on the job and Rhys being, what the fuck is Gwen doing? What's, my fiancé doing? And so Rhys being brought into the fold of Torchwood as Gwen brings him in, and him having to interact with Jack, who he's initially jealous of and has a homoerotic moment on Jack's terms, at least, with him. Great episode, very character focused. This woman, this writer, absolutely fantastic. She's so... Torchwood for me is so much... Her vibe is exactly what I think of in it. And I think the best of Torchwood to come in the future, even when she stopped writing for the show, are really pulling off these ideas that she... how to rephrase that? Are really drawing from the ideas that she were using. And then Adam, the episode, I like this less. This will matter less for Code, as she was saying. But for me, it's an episode I've seen before in other shows where, the personality switch, and even the idea of someone inserting them into the team. There was literally a Torchwood book that had this very plot.
I was reading that last night.
That released the year before this series, and there was a Buffy episode that was it Buffy, right? Buffy, yeah, that had this exact same plot, and so I'm a little less interested because I've seen this all before, but still, the character moments are pitch perfect in it, like when Owen and Tosh, who are reversed, so now Tosh is the very assured, very sexually assured, active one, and Owen's a little, the way he's dressing, he's just such a nerd, and he's such a weird, nice guy type nerd, how he forces his love onto Tosh and stuff, but when he offers Tosh this little rodent screen cleaner to try and win her affection, and she says, it's something like, a little rodent watching me while I work, I think I'll name it Owen. It's just excellent writing. This writer really gets the team so well, and so both these episodes and the ones in Series 1 that she wrote are really what crystallized Torchwood for me. And so for all my complaints about Series 2, which even one of these episodes falls into with how tropey it is, they just absolutely nail the characterizations. But what did you guys think of Meet and Adam?
I loved Meet because it was the episode that brought Rhys onto the team, really. And Rhys is such a good character. I love him so much. I didn't expect to love him as much as I did, even in Series 1. But Series 2 sort of solidified that for me. And it really made me feel again, I've said it before, I think, in the previous podcast, the idea that Torchwood, or maybe I've said it just to myself, Torchwood doesn't really have a weak link in terms of its characters. And Rhys wasn't even in that in Series 1, but bringing him in the fold and having him there and involved and aware of everything that's going on, it did elevate him to a new level, and it sort of made him equal with the rest of the team. And again, it's not that he was lagging behind at all. It's just that he occupied a different role. But to have him be aware and supportive of Gwen and and everything she does, love it. Great. My only gripe with Meet is that they cut a really cute scene with Jack and Yanto out of it, but at least it's in the DVD extras. But I really like, again, what you're saying about exploring the sort of the whales suffering and how that was a sort of subplot to the main Rhys stuff, and the fact that I just love this idea that they can have this these strong character moments and this sort of exploration of Rhys and his introduction to the Torchwood world, alongside this other quite profound plot about suffering and euthanasia, essentially, and they just work so well together. Weirdly enough, what was it? I was thinking about Meet the other day. And I was thinking to myself, someone mentioned, I think, that maybe it's one of the novels, I don't know, supposedly one of the novels, maybe.
Yes,
says,
yep.
Tries to say that the creature in Meet is the space, or from one of the space whales from The Beast Below.
A relative or something, yeah.
Yeah, which I disagree with. Why not just make it not that it really matches up in terms of time, but I think it makes more sense as a relation to the thin ice creature. You've got again, like it really doesn't match up because the episodes are so far apart, but you've got the idea of a undersea sort of creature being exploited for its sort of natural resources and stuff, except but it's like two different endings there, you know. In one, that creature dies, and the other one it survives and it goes off to be happy, I guess. And maybe there's some points of comparison to draw there, even though again they probably weren't made with each other in mind. You know, having the sort of approach to the creature in Meat versus the approach to the creature in Thin Ice is probably very fascinating. Of course, I'm referring to the Doctor Who episode, Series 10, just to clarify, if anyone's not seen it. Hopefully you should. But yeah, I thought Meat was really good. Adam, I wasn't sure on, because I'm never really fond of episodes that try and do what Adam was doing, which is like, you know...
Make Yanto a serial killer.
I actually really like that bit. But anyway, I always feel like really uncomfortable with this sort of idea, like, oh, there's your character now, and it's not that you're meant to care about him. I know the point is you're meant to be sort of uncomfortable with his presence the entire time, so in a way it worked perfectly. Are we talking about Rex and Esther or Adam? Adam, shut up. Adam, okay, I'm talking about Adam. So, okay, let me get my head on straight. Okay, I've got it. Okay, I don't like, because I love character moments so much, I don't necessarily like it when there's something that happens to the characters that radically changes them, unless it tells you something specifically about the character themselves. And you can argue that Adam does, because it sort of does, but with Tosh and Owen, they're so radically changed. It's a bit... You can't even imply like their opposite personalities to each other and use that to inform how each of them thinks. I mean, I could actually, now I'm saying it, yes you can. Shit, I don't know where I'm going with this. What?
I'd say the big Trojena character moving forward characterization moment in Adam, I don't think is related to Tosh and Owen at all. Although I do have a thing to say. It's Jack. You know, it's Jack's excellently big budget backstory we get on some Welsh beach.
No, when did I say it was theirs? I just mean like when you're taking it as a whole and you're taking the whole team, they are involved. Tosh and Owen are involved, so you can't really discount them. But I do agree. Jack's thing is the main focus. I really like the Yanto sort of moments, and I liked what I liked about the Yanto sort of thing where Adam changed his memories, made him think he was a serial killer and stuff. The interesting thing about Yanto is he rebelled against it and everything, and he went to Jack and asked to be locked up and all that. But where that really fascinated me was to see the amount of trust that Jack has in his team, but also specifically Yanto, where even though he says it's the best lie detector in the universe, I don't know, it's one of the best lie detectors around. Yeah, in Cardiff, best lie detector in Cardiff, and it's telling him that Yanto is telling the truth, he did actually kill these girls. Jack still refuses to believe it, and I thought that was a really good sort of moment between them.
Jack's not a STEM lord. Yeah, he's not going to just take, the machine said it, so it's got to be true. He believes in the emotional truths of his team.
Yeah, and but also, I mean, it's like that idea of trust, and I think trust is like it's not necessarily a big thing, but it's a thing it is a big thing. And maybe it's a big thing in Series 2. I'll talk about that in a moment. But yeah, so I thought Adam was really good, and it was interesting how he explored things. I'm never sure about how I feel when it comes to how it revealed the sort of Jack's past. What does that mean?
It was the worst day of my life.
I did not care. I didn't care for the grey thing at all. It was never convincing to me, and
I begrudge you everything.
And just also, like, how else are you going to introduce it if not out of the blue? But I don't know. Maybe it's because I just can't relate to it. I just smacked my microphone there. Maybe it's because I can't relate to it in any front, like that sort of angst over a little brother and stuff. Like, I don't give a shit. I really don't care about that. It's nothing I can relate to.
When it comes to Grey, I think the writing of Grey, the only way to really address it is to quote the man himself and say, sorry's not good enough. I don't care if Chibnall... I assume he probably repented for how terrible Grey's written and performed at some point, but sorry is not good enough. He absolutely drains these stories of life. His lines are just incredible. They like fascinate me in how unintentionally I assume funny they are. We're back to this tonal chaos of Cyberwoman, in that we got this, like in the finale, this really sad Owen and Tasha dying stuff, and then we've got Grey saying, I'd lie there hemmed in by corpses, praying to become one because you let go of my hand. It's like, what is going on? Because of you, the favourite son. Like this, these Cain and Abel evil relative narratives are just so hackneyed, you know. It doesn't matter if they were done on Buffy or whatever or not. These are centuries, thousands old stories. You know, like the Bible opens with this. This is, you know, in the first dozens of pages of the Bible has this story basically. It's just so ridiculous for Torchwood and Chibnall to do it and to be giving him those lines. But I'm bouncing back off that because I want to ask something back about Meet and Adam, and that gig in particular, because I know you have opinions on two-parters and three-parters and that kind of thing quite a lot. My point for them being a two-parter is the sandwich arc. So in Meet, Tosh brings Owen a sandwich while he's working to try and, you know, buddy up to him and get closer to him, and he kind of rebukes it and it doesn't really go the way she wants. And then in Adam, the situation is reversed because little creepy, shy Owen brings Tosh a heap of sandwiches and is like doing them as a big, you know, gesture of goodwill before he makes his profession of love to her. So we've got this absolute sandwich mirroring. In much, you know, John Hart is in the premiere and the finale. Sandwiches are in Meet and Adam. Do you think I'm onto something here? Was this, you know, what Trojana was going for?
Meat is in sandwiches as well.
Yeah, exactly. See, I wasn't sure how you were going to try and link those two episodes. I thought you might do something with Rhys, maybe, because in Adam you get that whole situation that arises when Gwen has been sort of rewritten and it's all confusing, and Rhys is like, what the hell's going on? But sure, yeah, there can be a two-parter if you want. And I think with Adam, it's okay, no, actually, no, I'm not going over that point. You can forget it.
Are you going to... The point about Adam the man, I have no idea if this is what you were going for, but there's a point where he goes, come on, group hug, and he does this really creepy face and kind of does this really creepy physical movement to gesture them all to come hug him, and he like tries to grab them to hug, and then he goes, Yanto, you know, why aren't you hugging me? And like the whole concept of Adam is gaslighting. He's this really creepy dude, and he's made Owen even creepier in a way. And he's like inserting themselves into their lives and lying to them. I know it's like magic sci-fi gaslighting and that he actually puts himself in their memories, but he's a real image of this kind of creepy, you know, maybe not necessarily physically abusive, but kind of abusive, very emotionally tormenting kind of guy that tries to rewrite situations how he wants them, except he literally can achieve that. And he also is all about the, you know, the physical touch. Like Jack has got really nice, positive, affirming masculine touch. Like he rubs shoulders, not in a creepy sexual way, but he like just touches people and he like lets them know he cares about them. It's a really nice thing, I think, that the show does, especially because Barrowman is so sexualized, but you can really tell there's a difference between how he touches like Owen and, well, not so much Gwen, but you look at Adam and he's like grabbing the shoulder when Gwen's never met him before and going, you remember this, right? And inserting memories into her head. I think it's a real mirror of like kind of positive masculinity with weaselly, creepy, bad masculinity, if you know what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah, I've got a point. So I've also been watching panels and stuff with the cast talking about the show, and good point you made there with the sort of the differences in how sort of characters touch each other.
Which Torchwood has a lot of.
Barrowman said, you know how the scene in, whatchamacallit, the Owen episode where they're in the jail cell together, and this was series 2, wasn't it? So
Dead Men Walking,
so,
I think.
Yeah, yes it was. So I'm getting really confused. Anyway, so they're in the cell together and Jack's talking to Owen, and you know, Owen's asking him why he was brought back, and Jack says he wasn't ready to give up on him and everything, and he does that sort of and I love this moment. He's like rubbing the back of Owen's head.
Yeah, it's really sweet.
And then and then Jack's speaking, and then he does that sort of playful shove and everything, and so I was watching
Owen's his real
panel.
little brother, not Grey.
Yeah.
That's like a nice little brother interaction.
Yeah, although weirdly enough, that's not how Barman intended it.
Really?
Although it kind of works. I think it's like, because it's no clear sort of type of relationship, I guess. Anyway, Barman intended it as a sort of like, he says he always imagined that if he had a son, that's how he would sort of
interesting.
be towards his son. So like, and that's what he was channeling with that sort of playful shove and that sort of that scene, but also specifically that sort of playful shove, that, you know, the sort of like, in a way, like
if Barman has a son, he wants to shove him around in jail, is what you're saying.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was his point. But I thought it was like this really interesting framing of the sort of Owen and Jack relationship, because I can see it in that way. In fact, I think it works really well if you view it from that lens, because it does work on a sort of brotherly level, but I think there is something to be said about sort of Jack viewing Owen as his son, because also we know that Jack does who knows. So I'm not going to mention that right now. Series 3. Anyway, sorry.
Fascinating.
So how I'm really not coherent in this episode at all. But Jack and Owen, like, being portrayed as sort of father and son, I love that. I think it's so good, and it does, and you can see that even in series 1 in their interactions and stuff. Owen does sort of rebel against him, like he's a sort of father figure, you know. And even things like when it comes to the hug at the end of series 1, there is just an air to it that is like, Jack looks after him as if he was sort of dadly to him. I don't know, and it works as well. It works just as well as a big brother and little brother sort of thing. But
if we're talking great father-son writing, Adam also features this line from Jack's dad when Jack was a kid, saying, "One day you're not going to want to play with your old man anymore," when they're playing catch on the beach.
Oh, that's so cliche. Oh, I hate that so much. Oh god.
Jack's memories are really cliche in general. It's not just the lines; they constantly are doing like all these Dutch angles to like go, "Whoa, this is back in time. This is really weird." You know, everything's a different color and we're at a different angle, and the writing's suddenly gone really bad with the dialogue. It's like, it's nothing like the From Out of the Rain thing where I couldn't tell where we were. It's like, I know exactly what's going on in Adam. If the writing's good, we're in the present. If the writing's bad, we're back in Jack's, you know, orange, yellowy past.
I'm just gonna pretend, right? I'm gonna pretend that the sort of choices that were made in Adam with respect to Jack's past and how shit the acting was, how shit the writing was, how weird that it was filmed, that it's bad in a sort of like cheesy way, you know, because it's so cliche and sort of you don't want to play with your old man anymore and all this nonsense. I'm just going to pretend that this is sort of Jack's idealised version, that that's not the true memories, because even though you could argue this doesn't really work because it's Adam dredging them up in a sense, so he's...
You go. You just made me think of a really interesting point. You finish first.
So I'm just going to take them as a sort of like, Jack in a sense has idealised his past and his memories of his father, and that does sort of translate into them being a bit cheesy and a bit silly and a bit cliche, because it's like, you know, in a sense it's like, aside from obviously the terrible loss, letting go of his brother's hand, it is a sort of like, oh, this is like almost perfect family sort of thing, where you're playing games on the beach with your dad and your little brother, and you've got this, you know, beautiful Beauchene Peninsula, and it's all nice and lovely and everything's happy until it's not. I'm just going to pretend that it was all intentionally bad, you know.
Well, you know,
and Jack's misremembering it.
What's so interesting about that is the woman that wrote this, Catherine Trujillo, who I'm always heaping praise on, she wrote one Doctor Who episode in the best series of Doctor Who, Series 9. That was the woman who lived with Maisie Williams. And a big thing in that episode is Maisie Williams' character is immortal, like Jack. Jack is mentioned in this very episode, and her memory, because it's a human memory, is so flawed, she has to keep writing everything down in journals, and she's got at her home this huge library of journals, because she can't keep all the memories straight, because she's just got a very mortal, you know, medieval mind that can't... Maybe Jack's 51st century mind is better at storing memories or whatever. I'm sure he's got some cyborgish in him, but she can't. And it's interesting you bring that point up about, like, the mutability of memory and how memory's flawed, because this writer is clearly interested in that kind of thing. So that might be a very on-point observation you've made.
Yeah, I always find the sort of a shoulder / me and Jack comparisons interesting because, I mean, that's a whole discussion in itself, why one remembers and the other doesn't. And again, it could be because the 51st century things, it could be the method by which they're immortal and stuff. But I do think it's probably, like, as much as Jack can remember things, and he apparently does have a better memory for stuff in general, I don't think it's crazy to think that over the years he will have forgotten the sort of details. It's like
he forgot 2 years, remember?
What?
In his first Doctor Who episode, he says, I can't remember 2 years of my life, they were erased. Maybe he just has a pretty shitty memory and there's no more plot to it.
You know, maybe, but I do like the idea that to sort of reframe the Adam scenes in a sort of more positive light, just view them from the perspective that what we are seeing is a polished and sort of false version of reality, I guess, and that makes sense enough. I mean, because you do even in a normal mortal lifespan, if you think back to memories, like, you do sort of, you know, buff off the hard edges, and you have a very sort of, especially when you're talking about your youth and stuff, it's a very idealized version. So to have Jack's memories be these sort of cheesy, cliche, you know, at least again up until things go wrong. Well, even then, it's like it's all very dramatic and, you know, ridiculous. So I don't know. I think he's sort of exaggerating things in his mind.
Yeah, but this is, I only remember the arguments with Gig that I win, because the rest are bad memories, and I just file them off in my brain.
Oh my gosh.
I think there's
Shut up.
I think the attempt to sort of define Jack as sort of characterize Jack as defined by this traumatic incident in his childhood, I think there's a fundamental problem with that, I think, because Jack at this point, you know, he's lived so long and he's been through so many sort of mutations since his Doctor Who origin. He's already a different character on this show than he was there, and at this point, you know, he's had so many experiences, so many dark secrets in his past and stuff, and to go back to Jack as a child when he's just like completely divorced from any semblance of the Jack we know now, it's like there is no inherent reason for us to be that interested in what he was like back then, or what his life was like back then. So it's kind of it's difficult to try and get us hooked to that. Obviously, it doesn't help that it's written shambolically, but I think part of that is that there's no impetus to write anything super interesting there. So we get a generic I lost my family member, and it's just so weird to think of Jack as, you know, hundreds or however many years later as still sort of kind of mulling over that. It's fundamentally like that. It's like they're scraping the bottom of the barrel almost.
I hate to be the one bringing up Anaric radio plays again, but there is a there is an audio drama called Month 25 about Jack at quite a young age. Left the Beauchamp Peninsula, started being a time agent, which I think does a more... It falls into a lot of the same issues with Jack is hard to do backstory for, because it inevitably feels so much smaller than what the character becomes. But it introduces this absolutely absurd idea. Gig's heard it, he knows what I'm talking about. This absurd two characters interacting that really zeroes in on, if you're going to do Jack's backstory, you're going to have to make it weird in some way. Making it small and like he let go of his brother's hand and then his brother was evil. It's too standard. You got to do something weird like the thing they do in that audio to make Jack's past interesting, I think.
Oh no, I really want to listen to it.
Would you agree, Gig, that what happens in that is strange? And
yeah, that is a very fun audio and is uniquely Jack. Like it's sort of, you can look at it and say, yeah, that's part of Jack's backstory. I believe that in a way that maybe the Adam stuff like it doesn't. So
it's additive. It's something that makes me go whoa to him more than I would in the past. But yeah, enough about this, you know, audio that I'm not sure how many people have heard. But yes. One other note on Adam I have. I'm not sure if you guys felt the same, but I felt this episode, more than any other episode in the first two series, went so over the top with the handheld camera work. There were so many cameras, the cameraman being really lithe and moving around everyone, and all these constant little rapid r.t.d. era zoom-ins, and just so much dynamism to how the cameras were moving that I was kind of dizzy. When Adam's confronted at the end, the cameras are going absolutely insane. Like the cameramen are like running up and down the hub. They're just going right into everyone's faces and going in and out, in and out. It's like, I'm not sure it's bad necessarily, because it's not done enough on Torchwood that it feels like a cliche of the show, and it's very, dramatic and everything, but when I was rewatching it, I was like, whoa, I did not remember this at all.
I don't really know much about cameras. I'm not very smart when it comes to that stuff. But do you think maybe it was a sort of intentional thing, because the premise of the episode is sort of meant to disorient you? Maybe
that's
having
a good reading. Yeah.
the crazy camera work is sort of meant to play into that, because I mean, you're already meant to feel that there's something sort of wrong or something off or something different about this episode, because obviously Adam's there and you can't exactly miss that, but to have the sort of camera work built into that would be interesting in itself, because obviously the characters are feeling weird as well, because there's he's inserted himself into their lives, and
I think you're right, because this just reminded me of how the flashbacks to the Beauchamp Peninsula use so many Dutch angles, which is clearly an intentional choice. So I bet you're right that, the director was like, I really want to enhance how disorienting and weird this episode feels, so that it feels wrong and not quite fitting stylistically into the series.
Speaking of the director, just something, Adam was directed by Andy Goddard, and I don't know if you would remember this, but in series 1 he directed Countryside, which notoriously had a climax that was such a clusterfuck, they had to completely redo it in the editing suite. So when it comes to direction, that might be worth taking note of there. But when it comes to really fast handheld camera work and little zooms, the Meat, which was not directed by Andy Goddard, was directed by Colin Teague, but I felt there's a lot of that in Meat as well. The scene where Gwen kind of tells Rhys the truth about her job, like the camera work in that, it's very like there's little quick zooms all over the place. It's very like it's all over the place, and actually, that's fun. I like that. It kind of takes me back to series 1 in a way. That sense of chaos, the sense of like everything moving incredibly quickly.
What I love in that scene is the frame. It's very Babby's first Kino, but the shot where Rhys and Gwen are arguing, and then in terms of composition, right in the middle of them is their huge 2000s era computer monitor with the wallpaper of them like hugging happily together in the background. Like that being in the middle of the argument is just, perfect. It's beautiful. It's very on the nose.
Kiss. That was great.
But excellent stuff.
Speaking of Gwen and Rhys, can we talk about something borrowed?
Yeah.
Lovely.
Because I have so much to say about that in terms of character dynamics. I think it is a ridiculously comfy episode, really fun, really, just it's a nice break from the sort of sadness that was with Owen's arc and stuff. But one thing that I think is a sort of big deal in it, maybe I don't know how overt it is or how much you would think this is the case, but I really love the sort of exploration it has with trust and love, and like so the Gwen and Rhys thing is quite interesting because it's such a good relationship. It's written so well, and I absolutely adore them. They're so wonderful together, which is really rare because I normally don't get involved, like interested in sort of like couples like them, like where they're just sort of established from the beginning, where Gwen and Rhys were together from the very start. So I normally don't really care for that because I'm like, I sort of prefer the build-up, if that makes sense, to any sort of relationship in fiction. So I was surprised that I cared so much about Gwen and Rhys. And Something Borrowed is just so good because obviously you have the big hero moment with Rhys and everything. But when it comes to trust, I'm just going to... Also, there's more to say about this episode, but I'm just going to touch on things like... I'm jumping right to the very end here, right? But you know how the whole sort of will they, won't they thing in series 1 with Jack and Gwen? I thought that was... I was about to say it's a bit of a misfire, but then it's not really if you sort of view it in a wider scale. I could have done without it in series 1, but I think that it was sort of necessary in a way because Jack and Gwen have this interesting relationship where they love each other unconditionally, like that's undeniable, of course they do, but they do have this sort of underlying attraction to each other. In series 1 made it more overt and more clear because it was like, they had the very heated scenes, maybe not heated, I don't know, but in Something Borrowed it was very interesting because it was like, let me get my thoughts in order for a second. Okay, so the way that Torchwood approaches Jack and Gwen fascinates me to no end, because it's so rare to have a show. We have a man and a woman who are, you know, absolutely attracted to each other. They think the other one is out, like, really hot, right? And, you know, understandable. And but they don't ever actually have a romantic relationship. They don't ever have any sort of sexual relationship either. They just, at the end of the day, they become these sort of like I said, it's an unconditional love, but it's a platonic love. And it's very much a case of Jack wants the best for Gwen and everything, and, you know, which is absolutely lovely. And I swear I had a really more coherent argument here, but I'll bring in something that Barrowman said at an interview as well. When I sort of go through any show that I'm interested in, I will go and sort of research and dig up, like, sort of interviews and panels and even things like fan reactions and stuff, because I like to have the context of what people thought when they were first watching it back in the day. And I thought it was really interesting because people sort of misinterpret the Jack and Gwen relationship a lot, where they think that the sort of will-they won't-they thing is continuing, and I guess you could argue that it is, especially in Something Borrowed, when they have this sort of scene between Gwen and Jack the alien, the Nostrovite alien. But I think at this point in the story, I think it's pretty clear that Jack and Gwen are not ever gonna, you know, get together in that way. Gwen is very much in love with Rhys, and Jack absolutely loves her, absolutely adores her, but he would never, ever make a move or anything like that. Certainly, and he has Yanto and stuff, and that's what Barrowman said in an interview. He said that, like, between Jack and Gwen there is an attraction, and it's certainly, like, it's probably a bit sexual more than anything, I guess, as if you're talking about sort of beyond platonic. He would say it's probably along those lines, but it doesn't matter, because for Jack, it's like he's got Yanto, and for Jack, Yanto is so much more than that. So I see a lot of, like, back in the day, people on, like, LiveJournal and stuff, given that was the sort of main place for fandom, people would sort of get angry at Jack and Gwen having interactions at all, because they thought it was like either a threat to Gwen and Rhys or Jack and Yanto. But the reality of it is that it was never a threat to either of those relationships. And what is really, really fascinating about it to me, aside from the fact that, again, you've got these two characters, you know, there's no sort of forced romantic or sexual relationship there. What's fascinating about it to me is that there is this idea of trust between them, because both these characters are in relationships, right? And they're in relationships they're happy with, but there is a sort of undercurrent of they both sort of secretly, not really so secretly, fancy the pants off each other, but it doesn't really matter, because they will never act on it, because regardless of the fact that they think each other's hot, and it does get mixed up in the fact that they're, like, you know, they're in death-defying situations and they're saving the world together, and, like, naturally tensions will be high, but they never act on it. And better yet, when you've got their sort of their partners, there's no sort of subplot, no serious subplot anyway, where Yanto or Rhys are jealous of either Gwen or Jack, depending on which side. By which I mean, sort of, Rhys has these jokes about Jack and everything, and initially he did have these worries back in series 1 and stuff, but once he's brought into the fold, suddenly Rhys doesn't worry about Jack anymore, because he understands Jack now, because he's been let into the world, and he sees...
It was the secrets and the lies and the miscommunications and hiding that was Rhys's problem, not that she had a good friend that was a man, necessarily.
Yeah. But the secrets and lies, I mean, certainly, like, there's a worry when she did have a good friend that was a man, and she's also being secretive and lying, you know, and also Jack is Jack, and he looks like Jack. Also, Rhys did have that insecurity, and it made absolute sense, but ultimately, like you say, when it comes down to it, and the sort of secrets are gone, and they're completely open with each other, Rhys no longer has that insecurity about Jack, because, and he makes jokes about it and stuff, because obviously Jack is, again, he's Jack, you know, he looks like Jack and he acts like Jack, so But Rhys is never actually seriously insecure, and he's never actually seriously jealous, and he never, he doesn't actually have a problem with Gwen and Jack having this thing where they have this connection and they love each other, because he trusts Gwen so much that it doesn't matter how close Gwen and Jack are, because Rhys knows that there will never be a sort of an issue there. He doesn't have to worry because he knows that Gwen loves him. And similarly, you never really get that from Yanto's point of view, but I would guess that it's much the same. There is this sort of level of trust there, and which I think is such a mature sort of take on relationships in general, because certainly there's this idea that, people have this idea that in relationships people will never be attracted to anyone else in any capacity ever again once they're in a sort of monogamous, I can't speak, what the fuck, monogamous relationship, that's the word, okay, got it. They have this perception that attraction for anyone else goes out the window, but that's untrue. Sort of the best and the most lasting relationships are the ones that are sort of open about that, and and it doesn't really matter if there is attraction to anyone else, as long as sort of they never act on it, or rather there's complete trust between the two people. And I think it's a more mature take on relationships in general to have Gwen and Jack have this sort of thing where they're kind of like, do you know what, you're really hot and I probably would, but also no I wouldn't. No, I probably could, but no I wouldn't, that's the word. So I feel like I'm just rambling on and not really making much sense. I get what you mean. I think what you're getting at is, or what you got at very succinctly, was that it's a relatively rare thing in TV to see a relationship that starts out as heated and romantically and sexually interested as, you remember in the first episode of Torchwood called Day One, the second episode of the show, where Gwen is grinding on Jack as he teaches her how to shoot guns and stuff. It's a rare show that takes that, where they both have this simmering interest in each other, and very wisely and emotionally maturely brings it back down to platonic on both sides, and neither one is a wronged party. Jack's not this seething Adam tear guy going, she should have been mine, Rhys won't take care of her the way I could take care of her, and Gwen's not this pining woman that, oh, Jack is so hot, and I like Rhys, he's nice, he's safe, but I really want Jack. There's none of that at all. There's none of those cliches. It's just they were both emotionally mature. Jack let go of that kind of interest in her, and Gwen, really committed to Rhys, and they really committed to these emotions and not being stupid with each other, and it simmered down, and then they both saw, that was better for each other, and they moved on with their lives, and that's so much sweeter and more earnest and true to life, and it's rare to see in TV because it's not very drama-filled to have characters go from that interest to platonic, but it's really, really nice. It's a very nice thing to see, and it's played so excellently by Barrowman and Kai Owen and Eve Miles. And to respond to another point you made succinctly, is that I think why the Gwen-Rhys relationship is engaging to people, as a ship or whatever, even though you don't see them meet at the start, is because relationships that are already established tend to be so static. I think of The American Office, you actually see the main romance in that. You see Jim and Pam get together the first time or whatever, but as soon as they get together in season 3 or whatever, the relationship stops, and for the next 7 seasons of the show, they never really change or fluctuate or modulate the relationship much at all until the last few episodes. It's just the exact same. And what is anyone, be they a shipper, someone very invested in fandom, or just a regular viewer, what are they to invest in? It's the same every episode. There's nothing moving, there's no dynamic to it. It's boring. It might be comfy or whatever and nice, but there's nothing to really engage with there. But Gwen and Rhys's relationship, from the very first episode of the show, it has so many steps to go. It doesn't matter that they're already living together. There are so many emotional hurdles to overcome and ways to bond and everything. So it's so engaging and well played, and there's so much stuff to happen that, I think it makes total sense why it would engage people like that. But my biggest thing with Something Borrowed is I need a debate handled that me and Gig have been having about the alien villains in it, the Nostrovites, I think they're called. Yes. Yes.
They're vampires, right? I call them vampires. Gig doesn't. Look at their teeth and look at their name with them and how they move around and they implant. This is pretty vampire-y. I'm not that out of. It's seduction-based fang work that they're doing. This is a total vampire adjacent
we
zone.
We can hear the desperation in your voice, Neo, as you say that, okay? All the listeners can hear it as well.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
It just struck me there's no bat stuff, which really puts a hole in it. But when I first watched this episode, I tell you, oh yeah, they're vampire aliens. And it's only now that I'm trying to defend it that I realise it makes so much less sense than I thought it did.
No, listen, they have elements of vampires, right?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for throwing me that bone.
But I wouldn't call them vampires because also they're not traditional vampires. But just like monsters in much of anything, there will always be sort of archetypes that get drawn from, and I think Nostra Rights did take a lot from vampires. Also, I am so upset right now that you managed to make my entire point, but genuinely succinctly, because I just ramble on. So good on you.
I was just building on the foundation that you already built.
Yeah,
that's all it is.
But I took like 10 minutes to get there, so thanks. But yeah, no, they're not vampires, Neo. I'm so sorry that they're not vampires.
So the rare cold take from my end. Savor it when it happens, because it doesn't happen often.
That was awful. That was your worst take yet. Cancelled.
A good take in the episode I really liked. Some excellent Tosh dialogue was when Banana Boat, Rhys's best friend, is, I'm the banana or this, and Tosh very quickly snipes at him. Oh, so you come up in spots and go soft quickly. Excellent Phil Ford dialogue there. That was really good.
There's so much good comedic dialogue in that episode in general. Like all the different characters around the wedding, like Gwen's mates and the mothers. Like it's just so lovely all round. It's just a great script.
What a nice ending too, with Jack just smiling at his old wedding photos he's had over the course of his life. I wonder if he had did he have the wedding photo from Small Worlds in there when he married that lady into fairies? I don't know if he did, but it was just a very nice ending. That
reused the prop.
It's not like Jack's angst that, oh man, my heart, I love Yanto, but all these past weddings of mine, my heart burns, I'm so tortured. It's Jack's, he's old at this point, he's smiling, he's very much in the groove of something happened. It's like what the 12th Doctor says in The Return of Dr. Mysterio, an excellent Cape Shit special, where he says, what does he say, Code? I know you like the quote. I forget the exact wording. Things start and that's good, and then things end and it's bad. Things, what is it?
No, wait, hold on.
What does he say?
Everything ends and it's always sad, but everything begins again, and that's always happy.
Perfect. You even got the accent right. Perfect. That quote applies so well to, I think, Jack's characterization in this series, this episode especially. Like, he's able to look at his old wedding photos and go, it happened and that's happy, even though it was sad that it ended. And that's, why at the end of the last episode, they're not all breaking down and crying. Tosh and Owen dying is super, 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 super sad. But he says, the end is where we start from, It's very, very, it's not just bitter, there's a little bit of bittersweet in it, because he recognises that it's really happy that they happened at all.
For the Series 4 podcast, because you've just made me think of so many things I want to say, but I can't say them without the context of Series 4, so I won't even touch upon them, but we will revisit this at some point.
Excellent foreshadowing.
Yes.
Here's an actual hot take on something borrowed. I think maybe not the best stuff, but the comfiest stuff in the episode has nothing to do with Gwen and Rhys. It's the Owen and Tosh stuff. It's how much calmer and more emotionally measured and happy they are with each other since they've started communicating more. Because at the end of that Joseph Lidster episode, the episode before this, Tosh says to Owen, tell me when stuff is shit, tell me how bad it is, don't block yourself off from me, it's cool, I can take it. And he's like, oh, okay. And so they start openly communicating, and then they're just so much more chill with each other this episode when they're openly communicating with each other, the big theme of the series. And when Owen at the end is like offering her a dance, in like a nice smiling way, and she's happy for it. It's just really good stuff. And I like it because it's not what I would have expected from the Gwen Rhys wedding episode, to see Tosh and Owen characterized so well. But you're ready to see that dead man dance, Tosh. That's what he says. It's just really, really nice stuff.
I think that something borrowed on the whole is like the sort of the complete package if you're looking for a sort of family episodes, found family thing, because it's so sweet and it's so comfy, and I mean, there is an alien that gets that makes Gwen pregnant, and that on its like, that's the funny thing. When I started watching it, and I remember I'd seen a small snippet of it, but I had no context for it back then, so I don't actually know what's going on. I remember when I started watching it, I was thinking, oh god, oh no, because it's like the premise of the episode is like it could have been dodgy, you know, Gwen getting impregnated by an alien, but it worked out in the end, you know, and it's like such a Torchwoody sort of take on it. You can't just have a normal wedding in Torchwood. You've got to have something bananas going on. But everything, like, and how sort of, I just love the team dynamics, and I think it's so nice, and everything from you know, even the little details, you know, when Yanto goes to get Gwen the new dress and everything, and then Tosh takes up to her and gives her the box, and I paused to read this because of course I did, and they've all signed the little tag on it, and like they've written the least we could do, and then they've written all their names, and I just thought it's so cute. I don't know, it's so like they framed it as like a gift from all of them, and I don't know, I just think it's lovely. And in that moment, you know, when I think it's when they've just actually officially gotten married, yeah, it must have been, and Gwen sort of turns and she smiles at the team, and they have that shot of them all like sitting. Oh, it's so sweet. I love Something Borrowed so much. It's such a wonderful episode.
It's so perfect how... Oh, sorry, you keep going.
No, I wasn't really going to say anything more. You continue.
Just how Gwen is so resolute. Like, even Rhys is like, yeah, we probably should postpone the wedding. That makes more sense. And Gwen is like, fuck no, I have to marry you now. Like, I'm aching for this. I need to do this. You've stood by me for everything. I need to marry this man as soon as I can. And then at the end, she refuses the retcon to erase how fucked up the wedding day was. There'll be no secrets in this marriage. It's just such excellent material, and I love that Rhys gets that. Like, it's great for Gwen's development, but Rhys was... It's not like a reward for standing by her, but it's like she can see everything that he's been to her, and she recognises it so much. It's not like a merit-based thing at all, but it's just this true connection and respect and love they have for each other. It's just so well done.
I love that Rhys has to be the one to sort of zap the egg away from Gwen. I love that he has to kind of take on the incredibly difficult Torchwood-esque job at the last minute, but they trust each other so absolutely, and they love each other. It becomes strangely romantic, even though he's like zapping this alien entity out of her womb. But they look like they just look kind of locked onto each other and their eyes, and it's so, yeah, I love that, and obviously it helps that they are two of the best actors in the show. They are just brilliant.
You know, another episode in the series is called Adrift.
Yes, that is an episode. You're right.
That's my second favourite episode of the series is Something Borrowed.
What? It's your second? Oh, right. Sorry, I thought you were going to say Adrift was your second favourite.
Adrift is my first favourite. Like, Christopher Theodore Chibnall's script Adrift is... there's only one element I think is slightly wobbly, but I think this is mostly such a perfect script that... It's astonishing watching this, knowing, like, I haven't always loved this man's work, but in this episode... the moral quandary he has about, you know, hope versus, you know, hope and ignorance and knowledge, and whether you want the knowledge of certain things that are so horrific and, you know, kind of tarnish your memories with how bad things actually got. It's just so, that central thing is so well explored and never happily settled. But it's not just that, the whole episode, it opens with, you know, Gwen is so angry that PC Andy, her friend from the police, didn't show up to her wedding. And Andy's just kind of openly, well, you know, I have a crush on you. I can't take it and whatever. It's not a bloody tap, Gwen. I can't switch it off. And Gwen, she doesn't get weird about it as like should be justified to do. She kind of just very openly kind of hits him, not in a weird way. And it's like, you know, oh, you know, blah, blah, blah. That's a shame, Andy. We would have liked you there. And he's like, yeah, I know. I just can't quite get past it yet. It's just, they're so openly communicating. It's such great stuff. But then the way Gwen keeps screwing over Andy in the episode, and it's this very kind of Doctor Who Clara thing of losing her humanity, or Doctor Who Jackie Rose's mother saying you're losing your humanity, that Gwen is kind of adrift from her police nature, her humanity nature, and that she just finds people disappearing kind of normal now. And Andy's like, what the fuck, that's not normal. You should be freaking more about this. And so she gets so invested in this case of this missing teenager. And these lovely little details, like the mother of the missing teenager, her house is strewn with videotapes because she just watches crowd footage to try and pick him out. It's like such this insane little stressful detail. The whole thing is just so well done. Excellent script. Do you guys agree?
And yes, and I also like in how your sort of communication theme is building up over series 2. I liked how it was sort of turned on its head almost, where Jack is like is being very much the opposite of communicative. He's like refusing to like go and investigate this thing. He's getting angry at her. He's getting he's not happy with her being interested in this sort of case. And at first, like, you're like, wow, Jack's being a bit of a dickhead here. But then it all sort of comes full circle and you realise that he was doing it to protect her. But it's sort of like, I don't know, it almost feels like the counterpoint to the communication thing in series 2. Not necessarily like, as in genuinely sort of trying to shoot it down necessarily. But it's the idea, it's like a sort of different perspective on it, you know, because the whole thing in series 2 is certainly that communication is good and healthy and it you know, improves things and all. But then in Adrift you essentially get the conclusion that sometimes knowing is not actually that good.
Yeah.
But it's never like presented in that sort of explicit way. It's not trying to say that knowing is bad, but it's more of a sort of nuanced take on it, because maybe in some situations it is better not to know, but it takes quite an extreme one for that to be the case.
I think it complicates the theme and it makes it a little less didactic, because it brings up, it's not just that you communicate, the method you communicate openly is very important. Like, we get Gwen rather rudely shuts Andy down when she openly says, I'm never going to recommend you to join Torchwood. It's good that she's being clear with him, but she could have communicated that better. And the same with Rhys when he goes off at Gwen and she says, stop your wittering, and Rhys is like, blah, blah, blah. You know, he makes these good points that you're fighting for the mundanity of life. You know, this big series 1 theme we were talking about the process of work and the mundane things in life are the things that really make life and humanity what it is. Rhys is articulating all that point, but he's doing it in a very rude way, and he's not really recognizing that Gwen is obviously very emotionally tortured about something. And so the resolution isn't in that scene where Rhys is like, work is work, home is home, then all this correct stuff about, you know, the mundanity of life is important and whatever. The resolution is at the end where Gwen, she's not closing off emotionally to Rhys. Like, before she was willing to talk about her job, but at the end she's reaching out to him as well, and, you know, like saying, we are going to talk about what you want. It's not just talk about what I want, we'll talk about what you want as well. And so as soon as Rhys has that, you know, he doesn't care about talking what he wants. He goes, okay, tell me everything about what you're going through. And so I think it's not necessarily a rebuke of that openly communicating is good, but it's saying it's more complicated than just say the truth.
Not the Rhys stuff, the Jack stuff,
no, I agree.
Mother.
But it's a theme woven in a lot of situations with the episode. But the murkiest bit is the bit you say, which is where the mother flat out says, I wish I didn't know. And yeah, so it's not a didactic thing where Chibnall is like going, you must always tell the truth to everyone no matter what, it is always the right thing to do. But it's certainly, it's a good episode for showing that sometimes that's the case, but you have to communicate. You can't just communicate whatever. You need to be communicating relatively equal amounts with someone, and you have to be, you know, not necessarily polite, but you have to mind how you're communicating. But then he's also saying, but in some situations, you know, this isn't always going to work. In some situations, people don't want the truth, and you might think it was the best thing to do to tell them the truth. They might disagree. You know, that's life.
Yeah.
People are complicated.
I mean, because that's the thing. I mean, it would be very easy to have any show, any story have, you know, present communication as like the, you know, I mean, communication is the best thing always, but ultimately, like you say, it comes down to how you do it and what you tell them, in a sense. Because also, like, this isn't a case of like Gwen's being lied to or the mother's being lied to for any sinister reason. You know, Jack was genuinely doing it out of protectiveness, you know, and his stance is completely understandable, you know, once you find out what it actually is. But I do like that idea that it sort of complicates things, and it makes it clear that life isn't so easy, and life is you know, it's not black and white where here's right and here's wrong, you know, always do this, never do that. I like that it sort of throws a sort of spanner in the works and goes, well, you know what, sometimes there'll be situations where you have to sort of take a nuanced approach to things, and, you know, sometimes, you know, you have to, basically it's different per situation, but I do think that ultimately it does, when it comes to the Rhys stuff, it does fall more on the side of communication is better. But I do think that Adrift as an episode is it certainly doesn't rebuke the communication thing. It just adds an extra element to it.
What just comes to me is that a distinction might be Rhys Gwen, you know, is a romantic relationship. Rhys Gwen Andy is a friendship. In those situations where there's like already an intimate relationship set up, open communication is the best thing. Gwen and Nikki Bevan, that's not what do you even call that? It's not even like a client. It's like she's the police officer, she's the citizen. I wonder if there's a thing in that there's a difference between when you have an intimate relationship with someone, you should be openly communicating, and then when it's someone you am I getting somewhere here at all? Do you kind of get what I'm saying? I don't know if there's anything to it.
I think there's, because when it comes to sort of a friendship or a romantic relationship, there is like an element of you do have to share the worst with each other. You know, you have to be open, even if it is like something painful. When it comes to sort of people who are removed from you, you don't necessarily have that burden on you, because you don't have that tie with them where they're not in your life to share everything with you in the first place. So yeah, you could argue that there is a sort of contrast there between with Rhys and Andy and Gwen's relationship to them compared to how when she's speaking to the mother and everything.
It's
and
DMs
also,
versus actual tweets, isn't it?
Yeah. Shut up. But also things like Jack, because Jack's role in the episode, at least initially when he's like refusing, you know, telling her no, don't investigate this, you know, stop right now, he's taking the role of a boss, you know, speaking to his employee there, you know, so that's like a different sort of approach on it as well, like the idea that sometimes communication and what is appropriate and what is best in each situation will also depend on what your relationship is. So but then when obviously Gwen finds out the truth, Jack goes from being her boss to her friend, and obviously he exists as multiple things. He is both her boss and her friend, but he operates different roles in the episode. So I think that is also representative in sort of how the approach to communication is handled, which I think there's probably more of a smart and interesting point to make there, but I do get what you mean.
Yeah.
So,
speaking of smart and interesting points to make, another case of retroactive foreshadowing in this episode, written by Chris Chibnall, was that, you know how Jonah Bevan is reduced to screaming 20 hours per day because of this horrific sight he saw? Come 2018, I was able to empathise so much with Jonah's plight.
I knew you were going there, for fuck's sake. Yeah, that's how I feel. Is that about Series 11?
Oh, I'd never criticise that. Gig, do you have any takes on this episode?
As much as we take the piss out of Chris Chibnall, and a question this episode raises is, how could Chris Chibnall write a script like this when it stands so obviously above most of the rest of his catalogue? But you can see some of his recurring themes in there. Yeah, it's got, I would kind of generalise it as parental trauma. I say, because there's something of a kind of recurring theme of parental relationships, and with Broadchurch, you've got people with missing children. And I think it all comes back to sort of like the parental relationship and what's the worst thing a parent could possibly go through. That's kind of a thing that seems to kind of crop back up, and certainly this is like the ultimate. Well, this Adrift, we get the ultimate form of that. We get something, unimaginably, like certainly beyond what could actually happen in real life. We get this unimaginably horrible fate, for her child, and what that puts me in mind of is to slightly change a maxim of Moffat's. Fictional characters can go to extremes that we can't, and this is a situation which couldn't happen in real life, and kind of forces us to kind of like And as a result, you get a character like Jack who has to take on responsibilities that we don't. So in his case, when it comes to this facility for all of these people who have to be kept there, and keeping that a secret from kind of the rest of the world, that's his way of trying to perform a kindness, almost. And that's sort of bitter in its own way. And I think it's not so much that we can apply that to real world situations directly, but we can see an example of how a good intention can kind of become painful when it's kind of stretched in this way. I don't really have much more to say about that, but that's just my sort of notes there.
Yeah. I'll go one other point a bit adrift. Do you know how many times John Barrowman tells this exact same story? You know how the scene where Gwen catches Jack and Yanto in the plant room? John Barrowman tells this exact story every single time. Anytime he's asked about any sort of, when it comes to sort of like one of the funniest moments on set and all that stuff, he always tells the story about how Eve Miles absolutely lost it every single time she saw John and Gareth in that specific situation, and they had to do like 8, 10, whatever it takes, and that's why you can see Gwen like laughing to herself as she walks away, because that was Eve Miles breaking character, and they couldn't get a better version of the scene without her breaking down laughing at the end of it. There you go, there's a little story for you. She just thought it was absolutely hilarious.
Well, speaking of, I don't want to jump episodes here, but when you talk about Jack and Ianto, so it just reminded me of the fact that Ianto still has his stopwatch. We see it in Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. He just whips it out like always at the ready.
No, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang is interesting. There is a vampire this series. We get Spike from Buffy as Captain John Hart. Oh, yeah. There we go. Now I'm satisfied.
You're still hung up on the vampires, aren't you? You can't get over it.
Here's another good Chibnall script, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. It's a fairly, it's not the most original, but it's a good premiere. I really like the dark mirror image of the main character. Well, I think Gwen's the main character of Torchwood. I think Gwen is the main character of Torchwood, but nevertheless, the dark mirror image of Jack is, it's a good trope. It's played well. Funny story.
John's great.
James Masters, who, I guess this isn't a big deal to both of you, but his character on Buffy, Spike, huge, really big deal back in the day. Real fandom favourite character.
Yes.
Real breakout character. Big deal. Big coup for the show to get him. And the whole Western theme they do, like in the bar, those Western shots of their eyes and their holsters as they walk up to each other and then they kiss instead of fighting, and then they fight anyway. It's all... And then Blur's song 2 starts playing. It's like a fan edit, but it's that really good schlock. Chibnall's good at this kind of schlock. Chibnall's problem is that he sometimes mixes the schlock, like, I begrudge you everything, with Owen and Tosh dying, or Cyberwoman with, like Code was saying in the Series 1 discussion, where they kind of want this jokey element, but then they're having this really depressing stuff in the episode. Chibnall screws up when he's trying to have these different tones at play. But Kiss Kiss Bang Bang is just, it's fun. It's a fun way to start the series, and so it all works there. We've got the Help Me Obi-Wan jokes. We've got the Western-themed original score as well. We've got Captain John just off the cuff names himself Captain John Hart as like a homage or parody to how Captain Jack's calling himself Captain Jack Harkness now. Yeah, really good stuff. I like the concept of John and Jack were together. It's so confusing since John Barrowman is the actor that plays Jack.
Yeah,
and James Masters.
Yeah.
They were together for 5 years in personal time, but 2 weeks in Universal time or whatever. Jack coming back off the back of Doctor Who Series 3 saying, here I am now, who I am now, that's all that's important. Very mindfulness stuff. It's all really good. And I liked how, how the show often does the pulling out of the cityscape shot scenes. I liked how in this episode we got like 5 times where it was kind of a Game of Thrones intro map-esque thing where we zoomed around to different locations in Cardiff to really orient ourselves where everyone was. The show occasionally does this, but it does it all the time in the Series 2 premiere. It was pretty cool. It almost made me wish the show did it more. Yeah, good episode. Captain John's nihilism is really foregrounded too when he like says we're a cosmic joke eye candy. It's kind of weird how he it sounds like it would work better in a novel, the calling Yanto eye candy all the time. When you actually have to hear an actor say it all the time, I kind of get, this feels, you can write this stuff, George, but you can't say it, as Harrison Ford would say. But yeah, what did you guys think of the premiere?
I thought it was fun. I really like Captain John. I think he's a good character. He's a good as a mirror to Jack. And what's interesting about him as well is that essentially Jack used to be like that, you know. So you're not just looking at sort of. It's not like you're looking at the inverse of Jack or whatever. You're looking at Jack if Jack hadn't had all of the development he's had. So, which is really quite fascinating. So it's like, in a way, it tells a more interesting story about his past than, for example, the Grey stuff, because it's telling you about Jack's past without telling you about his past, in a sense. I mean, it kind of does, because it also gives you a bit of a backstory with John and how John and Jack knew each other and everything. But on the whole, when you're sort of looking at it in a more general view, if you really think about it, everything that John does and how he acts in general, like, if you just put Jack in his place, like that, it would kind of work for a younger version of him, which I think is really cool and really fascinating. And it's kind of like, it's like John's like sort of coming back, appearing out of the blue to sort of disrupt Jack's life, but it's sort of like, it's very, and it's good as well because they used to be lovers and everything, so it's like, it's played as a very much Jack's like, I've moved on now, you know, I've settled down, I'm not doing the crazy life anymore, I've matured, you know, where John's still in that sort of phase of life where he is, you know, he's going a bit bananas and, you know, all the
coming up
drinking
soft
in this
and floor spots.
What?
Well, you said he was going bananas, I was just...
Oh, shut up.
Referencing
Honestly.
banana, yeah.
God damn it. But I do think it is very fascinating to see that, and I like the way they play off each other. And I thought it was like, when I was watching Declassified, they were talking about that initial introduction with the sort of Western, this sort of saloon imagery where Jack pushes the doors open and everything, and it's played as a sort of standoff, and then they walk up to each other and they're like, oh, it's so unexpected, you know, they kiss instead of punching each other. And I'm like, yeah, it's a bit unexpected if this was any other show, but this is Torchwood. I would have been disappointed if they hadn't kissed or something, knowing Jack. But that doesn't mean anything like bad, because on one hand I did expect it, sort of, but that's, in a way it's like almost to the show's credit, because any other show you wouldn't expect that. But it's the fact that Torchwood is just open about like these like sort of ridiculous subversions and all that. Like I think that's really fun, and I loved the fight scene. I loved how it was like sort of portrayed that they were like properly fighting, like really laying into each other, but they were enjoying it. They were having so much fun, and to see a sort of wilder side of Jack was also really enjoyable, because I mean you kind of see it in Doctor Who to an extent, but to see it in this context was fun, because obviously you're coming off of episodes where in Torchwood Jack is a sort of like, he's the leader, so he's a bit more serious. He does have his moments of joking around and stuff, but he is serious and he is quite a bit different, so it was nice to see him sort of let loose a little and just be a bit you know, bit on the wild side there. Quite like that. Even
the casting of James Masters aside, which is so key to the role, I think it's very good John Hart is a man, because I think like he's very much a jilted ex-lover. Like he resents the Torchwood team because why are you with them and not me? Like that's what he says at the end of Fragments and in Exit Wounds and Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. He's all very much like the jealous lover, so much that he tries to kill Jack with how tormented and enraged he is over him moving on and stuff. I was just thinking the optics of this would be so much less interesting, I think, if it was a woman, you know what I mean? And it was like, oh, Jack's entranced this woman so much that she's psychotic, hysterical over him. But you play it with the energy that James Masters does, and it feels like an interesting character note, but it doesn't feel like anything more than that in a bad way. In a good way, it doesn't feel like more than that, which would be in a bad way. I'm speaking with a lot of clarity right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I follow what you're saying. It would have felt weird and uncomfortable, sort of if John had been, you know, like a sort of past female lover and stuff. Although you make an interesting point about the fact that, you know, Captain John ex-lover and it's a man. I really noticed this, which is quite fascinating to me, actually.
It's good you noticed he was a man,
I'm going to kill you. Anyway, I think it's quite interesting, actually, that, you know, when Jack has sort of like lovers on the show, and I mean, we're not going to get into spoilery territory here, but even things like in the books and all that, which, you know, someone might argue and go, oh, they're not canon. Shut up. Anyway, books are canon. Anyway, Jack tends to have male lovers, which far more often than female, which I think is really fascinating. Just, you know, as an aside, because obviously we touched on representation and stuff in Torchwood and the first episode of the podcast, so I won't go into it too much here. But I think it's a good thing, because obviously Jack he's not gay, he's like pansexual or omnisexual or whatever, you know, because everyone uses all sorts of different terms for it, and so who knows which specifically he would call himself. I don't think he would label himself at all, but I think it's fascinating that they tend to choose his lovers to be male, and whether that was, I don't know, a specific choice by John. Obviously it was a specific choice on some level, but whether it's a specific choice by John or Chibnall or even Russell T Davies, who knows. I just think it's interesting because it's not like the archetype of what sort of Captain Jack is exactly unique in a sense. That sort of swashbuckling, almost, you know, not necessarily time traveler. You know what I mean? Like, he's very confident, self-assured, and he's flirting, and it's like he's a ladies' man without being a ladies' man, you know? I mean, he kind of is a ladies' man regardless. It's just an interesting sort of subversion of expectations, because you have, I cannot think of any examples right now, you have to forgive me, and some of them would probably be in like book series I've read and stuff, but you do get to like these characters like Captain Jack where they're like, oh, they're so flirty and they flirt with anyone and everything, you know, but weirdly enough these guys never have any obvious relationships except with women, which is really funny, because they make the point of them being so flirtatious and, you know, apparently not having any sort of boundaries in a sense, you know, for want of a better word, and yet they never really show that, or if they do, it's sort of in a joking way. And you could almost argue that Doctor Who sort of falls into this in a sense, because not necessarily, because he does have like that really nice like, sort of kiss scene with the Doctor and everything, and that's not played as a joke, because I remember John Bartman had an interview about that as well, where he said that he was very conscious that he didn't want it to be played as a joke or something not serious. And he kisses Rose, does he? I can't remember that scene now.
Yeah. Yep.
He kisses Rose and then kisses the Doctor, I think. And he was very particular about that scene playing exactly the same. Like the kiss was not supposed to be different and everything, just because, you know, it's the Doctor, because it's a man. And certainly
if it was different, Eccleston would have turned around and, well, I'm not going to say it, but you know what Eccleston does.
Yeah. So I just think it's really fascinating for Jack that the majority of his relationships are with men, because ultimately in media it is not taboo to have a man with a woman, obviously. So the fact that it's so prevalent with Jack that he is with men and they never shy away from it, and that is, you know, probably what they show the most of, it is a nice and a good subversion of sort of expectations there, where you get that sort of, it's like, I mean, he is like, you could make the argument that he is like a sort of ladies' man, that sort of archetype, but ultimately it doesn't, but not, you know, the ladies are there, but without the ladies almost. I don't know what point is here. I just think it is really nice.
It's
especially rare.
It's interesting.
Especially rare to have a character who's like, oh my god, stop talking over me.
that was lag. That was not intentional rudeness. Okay. Go on.
Sure. Especially interesting as well, because it's like, because Jack is such a sort of he is, if you take away, is certainly like things Anyway, so let me get ahead. Like, okay, Jack is like sort of, if you sort of boil him down to what his character archetype is, he's such a sort of, it's like sort of, it's a very masculine sort of a character, you know. He has, you know, in terms of like stereotype stuff, he's a leader, he's tough, he's strong, he's muscular, you know, he's saving the day, and you know, and as much as that is unfortunate that these are sort of roles that are only really given to men in media, it is interesting that you get this, and it's, you know, without extra context, Jack does come across as gay, essentially. So it is really fascinating to have a character who is ostensibly gay and also embodies everything that people normally don't associate with gay men, which I think is really good. Anyway, that was like longer than I expected to go on for, but you know what I mean, like, great. But you do get the feeling it's sort of like, you have a cast of characters, and then there will just be one character who's gay or bisexual. Well, it's actually rare to get bisexual characters because, I don't know, the way that media handles bisexuality is like really, really strange, and it's like they're almost unwilling to admit that it's a thing. But you have like a sort of gay character in a lineup, and more often than not, it will be like that character's whole sort of storyline and inner conflict will revolve around their sexuality, and that's like, I mean, that's not surprising because in this day and age, you know, it is such a big thing and it's a big conversation and it's a big topic and everything, but it doesn't make it feel normalised in a sense, because they keep drawing attention to the fact that in this day and age, it is seen as something other, and it shouldn't be seen as something other. So to constantly have shows putting out these characters who are stressing about this stuff, it is relatable, you know, in a sense, because it's like, so the LGBT community, if there's LGBT characters and they're talking about this stuff and as a conflict for the character, there is something there to relate to, because also like anyone who's LGBT is going to be watching it and go and understand this struggle because it's what I live, you know. So these people will be watching it and having this sort of point of reference, but it doesn't really do much to normalise these sort of different sexualities and maybe different gender identities in media, because even in the context of the show, you're showing the characters, but you're still presenting them as other, you know, by having this conflict revolve around their sexuality or their gender. Whereas Torchwood takes a radically different approach, and it's just a fact, and it's never something that they have any real conflict over. It's never, you don't get an entire episode about stressing about them being bisexual, you know. It's just a thing that happens, and yes, they will have, for example, Tosh will have a relationship with a woman, but at no point in the episode, for example in series 1, obviously this is meant to be talking about series 2 here, but in series 1 it's never pointed out and going, oh yeah, wow, look, Tosh is now with a woman, that's so strange and unexpected, you know. And I think that's a really lovely approach to it, and certainly when it comes to Jack, I just like how little attention is drawn to it, and how little song and dance made. I feel like I'm repeating myself from the series 1 podcast, but I can't get over how well it's handled and how natural it feels. So it is refreshing to have this sort of approach to things, and to have Jack be this strong and masculine hero, and at no point is that ever sort of put in contrast or whatever, you know. It's never put against his sexuality. It's never, you know, those things just exist simultaneously, and they work so well. And oh god, I don't know if I'm explaining myself really well here. Anyway, Torchwood good, representation good, the end.
Gig, do you have any declarations on this discourse?
Well, just on the whole Jack and John thing, I think this is just sort of a small side note, but I think having John be a man, and which we were on earlier, I think, and having him mirror Jack in that way, I think that helps re-emphasise the way in which the relationship between them and the lifestyle that John wants to drag Jack back into is kind of inherently a bit narcissistic. Like, they're so, like, he's so similar to the old Jack, and they were so, like, and rather than complimenting each other, they were so kind of complicit in whatever that was. And that was a really good point you made earlier, Code, about how it's so much a better lens on Jack's past than the grey shit is, because obviously what Jack was like in his past as a time agent has actual implications for who we know him as and who he is now, which, you know, Jack as a child who has a moment of physical weakness does not like reflect on or comment on Jack's current personality in any way at all. So I think, yeah, it was an incredibly savvy decision to for John Hart to be a man, and obviously I think the thing that Neo's avoiding saying is that John Hart's kind of a gender flipped femme fatale in that sense, which is a point that a certain author brought up in an essay, and it's one of those savvy things that just gives Torchwood its identity, and it's just one of the things that makes it a great show.
This is unrelated to all that, but something I really like about Exit Wounds. Well, are we all done there? It's so rude for me just to divert discussion.
No, it's okay. I think I've said everything that has to be said.
Okay.
Torchwood goods.
Speaking of that author, I guess, something I really like about Exit Wounds is that it's just this utter narrative collapse of the show. There are so many, like, for the show as it is in series 1 and 2, there's a lot of like axioms to the premise of it that need to be in place so the show can function, and most of them are just smashed by the Exit Wounds. Like, of course we have Owen and Tosh dying, and so the team is no more. Like, the team is broken, obliterate. Well, did Joseph Lidster write this episode? Something got broken in it. But yeah, so we lose 2 members of the team. But it's not just that. We also have the Weevils go public and are actually attacking cops and stuff. And so that is a big thing, has been like the Weevils are kind of these secret villains Torchwood keeps having to neutralize and capture, and that's gone. The Weevils are like public. It doesn't matter how the future series deal with that whole thing. The point is, in this finale, it's like a big deal. Weevils are public. Everyone can see the Weevils. And then we also have Cardiff getting blown up. There's explosions all over the place. It's not as bad as Jack says. They didn't blow up Cardiff. Like, Cardiff's not destroyed, but there was like 8 explosions, and they really fucked up a lot of buildings. So, like, Torchwood, like, we say they screwed up in the first season finale and kind of lost. We can say that, yeah, but in the second one, it's so much more so, because Cardiff, it really gets like hundreds of people, well, scores of people probably would have died if, you know, some of those were apartment buildings and stuff. So it's a real show is absolutely broken down at this point, and the show cannot continue in this way. Although originally there was going to be another series in the vein of series 1 and 2, another 13 episode series with, you know, another Peter J. Hammond episode and everything. That was originally going to happen. That's not what eventually happened. We'll talk about that for the series 3 discussion. But I think Exit Wounds kind of ends the show as it is, very definitively. Like, Cardiff is screwed up, Weevils are public, Owen and Tosh are dead. Like, the premise we were working on for 26 episodes is done. And it feels strong as a finale for all its flaws, you know, for all its, you let go of my hand. It's very strong because it just structurally, it's a great bam, bam, bam breakdown of the show. And that always feels exciting and monumental when, you know, things like that happen. Something else I like about it that's not really related to that is how Jack says, "I forgive you," to his brother when he wakes up out of the vaults, because that's what the 10th Doctor said to John Sims' master in the Series 3 finale. That's so important to Jack's characterization. And speaking of Doctor Who, I think it's very Stephen Moffat-styled, crazy chronology, timey-wimey stuff with how Jack gets buried in 27 AD underneath Cardiff, and then kind of Doctor Who Heaven Sent style, he keeps dying from choking on the dirt or whatever, up until he gets dug up, you know, centuries later, and then he's in the Torchwood vaults. So we've got like these non-linear Jacks existing at the same time and like constantly dying. It's all these really, it's full of great ideas, Exit Wounds. It's just not a particularly well executed episode in a lot of ways. It's got a lot of that tonal issues, and the grey stuff is just nightmarish and not in a good way. But a lot of it really works. And I love the Owen and Tosh like kind of final exchange thing where Owen's absolutely freaking out and is going, not like this, I'm not dying yet, you want to watch the dead man dying again? And Tosh is like, oh, because you're breaking my heart. It's like, it's a bit schlocky, but it's just iconic, and it's so played into those characters. It's just really well done. I wouldn't exactly call this a good episode, but I think it's a good finale, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, let's pick apart what you said. There's like 3 points there at least, maybe 4. I like what you say about the deconstruction aspect. I always think one thing that's always fascinating to me in shows, and certainly in Doctor Who and indeed now Torchwood, I love when sort of the show looks at itself and goes, what are the pieces that make this show, essentially, and then it sort of pulls them away to sort of see how it stands, or how it changes, that sort of deconstruction and analysis almost. And Doctor Who does this really well, especially things like Series 9 and everything with the Doctor-companion relationship and stuff, because that's such an intrinsic part of the show. So what happens when you take that away? And then it's also, Doctor Who's done this before, like things like grounding the Doctor on Earth and everything. And so what happens when you take away these core elements of the show and try and, figure out how it all pieces together and how it works? And also, this is more relevant for the Series 3 discussion, which we will get into next time. But I do think that was a really good, essentially, starting point, which really brings in this whole idea from Jack, where he's like his final line, where we start from what's the line? You know it, Neil.
The end is where we start from.
Yeah, that's it. I think that is really fascinating, especially in the context of they have deconstructed Torchwood essentially and taken away all these elements of it that are in a way very much core to it, so even that on its own, just as a standalone, it really does leave you wondering, where are they going to go next? Because, you've lost 2 members of the team, and suddenly, like, all this sort of, the weevils are out, in a sense the secrecy is gone, and they have to rebuild, in a sense, which I think is really fascinating. But, shit, I've forgotten everything else you said. More specifically, what I was going to say in relation to what you said.
I forgive you, Owen and Tosh's last exchange.
That's it, okay. I really think the sort of callback with the I forgive you is really good. I honestly, it's such a shame, like, as much as I kind of wish the whole Grey thing hadn't been there in general, if they had just at least gotten a better actor or something for Grey, it could have worked more than it did. I think that, like, sort of the ideas behind it are fundamentally flawed, but it really wasn't helped by having the sort of clunky acting and stuff.
I hate to go into fanfic, but I think if you just made it like it couldn't have been Susie, but like an earlier Torchwood member or something that he'd wronged, I feel like that would have kind of synced up a little bit better into it. Just not his fucking brother.
Yeah, it would have been more sort of relevant to the Jack we know now, instead of going, oh, here's this previously unknown trauma in his life that up until this moment has affected nothing, and even though you know the story now, it doesn't tell you anything about how Jack is in the modern day, because that's the problem with it. It's like, it doesn't tell you anything about Jack, really. I mean, you learn this piece of a sort of the puzzle of his life, but what does that tell us about the Jack we know? Absolutely fuck all. Like, what are we meant to take away from it?
You're in for a bad scene when that woman wailing Grey's theme starts playing. That's when I groan.
Yeah. Although I'd like you say, I do like certain aspects of, like, Grey burying him and everything, and if I'm getting it right, there would have been a point in time where there's like 3 Jacks simultaneously existing,
the
which
40s.
I think is which is, I think it's really funny and really fascinating, and it is very timey-wimey.
The day of the Jack, we are due this story.
Big Finish, get on it. We want to see all 3 Jacks having a multi-Jack story. That would have been great. No one of. Please don't do it, Big Finish. I will kill you. But not literally.
You don't want a Big Finish multi-Jack story. Interesting.
Oh, that'd be painful. But then it would also be fascinating just to see how John Barrowman played it. Anyway, and then going back to your point about the Owen and Tosh thing, I think that was a really lovely scene, and God, I was crying a lot during I was a mess. I didn't expect it. I didn't expect anything at all, because I didn't know it was going to happen. Now I can talk about it, obviously. When I was going through sort of books, I was looking at the early books. So it's like, and I saw this reference on the TARDIS wiki page, and I was TARDIS data core, and I was really upset about this, that they would put this in there. So I was like scrolling through trying to figure out which books I wanted to read. And out of curiosity, I clicked on one that was like set in series 2, but it was like set really early on in series 2, so I was like, this is fine, I'm not going to get any big spoilers from this. And then there was just a line, this is set between me and Adam. And obviously Owen is still alive at this point. And I was like, what? No! Because I was, so when like, was it episode 6? Yes, Reset came along and he got shot. I thought that was over for good. I thought Owen was dead forever. So I was very upset. But, so, even though I got sort of spoiled for Owen's death arc, in a way, I didn't realise he would come back as a zombie sort of thing. I was still surprised by the fact that he came back, and I was surprised that he died at the very end, because I was kind of, genuinely, I was sitting there thinking when I was watching that scene, I was like, oh, they can't possibly kill Owen. We've essentially seen him, in a way, die twice already, you know? Or at least they've had, you know, I had the moment where he fights death and everything, and I was like, that was set up as as a death scene in more ways than one. But,
very, very well done. That was very good.
Yes, so it was like, I was like in tears then, because I was thinking Owen's gonna die for good this time. Then he just doesn't, which I thought was like, I was sitting there kind of baffled by it, in fact, because I was like, what the fuck? And I was fully prepared. And then you've got A Day in the Death where it's set up as if he's gonna jump off the building. And I was like, oh my god, see if this ends when he actually dies for real. So series 2 really, you know, it really strung me along with Owen's death, to the point that when Exit Wounds came along, first of all, I didn't think Tosh would die. I did not think in any world Tosh died, partially because I'd seen like Big Finish, and just to clarify, I did not know anything really about Big Finish or where the stories took place, but I remember what little I knew. I remember seeing, like, I think it was Believe, maybe was Tosh in that. I think she was.
Everyone's in that. Everyone. Yeah.
Okay, I knew it was that one, because I remember the blue cover and stuff. I've never really looked at it since, but I remember like seeing it like in passing when I was like scrolling through Big Finish before I'd even started Torchwood, and I remember just seeing Tosh like stuck in my mind for some reason. And I saw her on the cover and I was like, oh, okay. I didn't really have any reaction to it at all. But when I was like watching Exit Wounds, I was like, okay, well, I was not expecting Owen to die, because I was like, oh, we've had so many like sort of moments where I thought he was gonna die and I was crying, I was a mess, and he didn't die, so I was like, I'm sort of prepared for him to have some miraculous escape. I was like, but I know for sure Tosh doesn't die, because I've seen her in an audio. I didn't remember that it was Believe. I didn't know anything about the audios. I knew nothing at all. I just recall her seeing her on this like audio cover. So I was like, and for some reason I was convinced this took place like, you know, after even series 4, and like again, I really didn't have any clue what the plot of any of the series were. So I was like, for some reason I was like sitting there like, oh, it's fine, Tosh, she's bleeding out, but it's okay, the rest of the team are in the hub, they're gonna find her, and she's in the medical like bay sort of place, you know, they're gonna help her and she'll be fine. Owen I wasn't too sure on, but I was like, but they can't kill him, surely they can't kill him, because we've had these moments before where it seemed like he was gonna die, and then he didn't. So I was like, okay, it's fine, they're gonna survive. Then fucking Owen dies, and I was like, okay. And then Tosh dies, and I'm like, okay, what the fuck? So I was in a mess at this point. I was like actual proper like full on sobbing, because I was like, because it took me, it was so shocking, because it was like I'd somehow built up this expectation for myself that they both survived, or at least one of them survived. So to have them both of them go out like that, and it was a really good scene. It was a powerful scene, and Tosh was great in it, and so was Owen. In fact, they were both just so good. So it really hit me probably harder, because for some reason I had convinced myself that neither of them, or at least one of them would at least one of them would survive, like neither would die. So I don't know, that was a a tough episode for me. It genuinely traumatized me. I
remember my experience watching it. So series 2 was early 2008, so I would have been 13 watching it, and I figured after the mid-season arc with Owen, I always figured he'd be going at the end of the series, because he'd already died. I didn't see Owen sticking around as a zombie, so I figured he was going to die. But that moment that Grey shoots Tosh absolutely blindsided me. Tosh was my favourite of the series 1, series 2 crew. absolutely devastated by that. And their death scenes were played so well, but just absolutely shocking, the Tosh death. I like hearing your experiences, long after the fact of how, the wiki policy spoilers affect and how you get these interesting contortions in your mind, because that's such a common thing with how people watch stuff these days. Yeah. Gig, do you remember your experience with watching Exit Wounds the first time?
It was actually in... I think the first time I actually finished Series 2 was in the stream with you guys when we did it. Yeah, I'd always kind of put off early Torchwood. I mean, I watched like the first part of it in like a Twitch stream like last year at some point, but I didn't get to the end because it was a marathon. Unfortunately I was sort of spoiled on what went on in the end of Series 2, because it was a bit of infamous by that point and stuff like that. And I also, like, sort of my interest in Torchwood was kind of like vague, but even so, even knowing what was coming, and even obviously being able to see how the level of artifice involved in the episode is basically just a big exercise in setting up Owen and Tosh to die. In Tosh's case, a quite senseless manner. Grey just turns up and randomly shoots her, and the others are in the hub but don't get to her in time. But even knowing all that, that scene between them is quite gorgeous, and I think, and that line where Owen's like, "Give me one good reason I shouldn't be raging my way to oblivion, shouldn't be screaming my head off and just having a total freak out," and Tosh just begs him like to just please just go quietly because you're hurting me. Like, don't and he does care about that in the end. Like that bond between them is just so faintly like rekindled at the end, and it's kind of, and it works so well for them to be dying together, as strange as it is, and for that whole tragic romance to just end in them both getting nuked at the same time. I think it's really in getting rid of those two characters that the premise of the show is obliterated, like certainly more significantly than any other stuff. Cardiff gets blown up, loads of people die. I think that's kind of whatever. Like, if you can recover from the blooming End of Days with the big kaiju rampaging around Cardiff massacring everyone, I think you can recover from that. But certainly getting rid of Owen and Tosh, that's what completely changes the nature of the show. Like, you couldn't just replace them with two other characters, that would be shit, right? You need to do something radically different by that point. So yeah, I think you can give it credit for how it gets rid of those two characters, and how maybe I would have been open to another season with Owen and Tosh, but at the same time it's kind of like with this season, and I think it's telling that in the almost 3 hours we've been talking about it, we have not stopped off to talk about Sleeper, To the Last Man, Reset, Martha's Arc, any of that stuff. Like, there's so much stuff in season 2 which is not that interesting. It's not like, I don't know if the show could be said to be I know, I'm sure you have opinions about that, but yeah. I'm not sure the show could be said to be fully working in as much of a way as is commonly thought Series 3 works, and I won't get onto that obviously, but you could argue that maybe the reconfiguring of the show's premise that happens between Series 2's finale and Series 3 is necessary for Torchwood to reach maybe its apex, at least as far as most people's opinions are concerned. But it's kind of a shame as well.
This is one of the reasons the audio only Series 5 and 6 work, is because the show gets so regularly blown up. Series 1's only finale where it really continues on to a second series, relatively fine. The way Series 2, 3, 4 and 5 blow up the show's premise so much, I think it's a very endearing, this is a thing Torchwood does. You know how Doctor Who has the main actor regenerates into a new actor with a new personality, and then they have different dynamics with everyone. That's like a real iconography of Doctor Who thing. I think Torchwood kind of version of that is every so often we completely reshuffle the whole concept of the show. Like, even the setting being Cardiff isn't always safe. There's continuing aspects every series, and there's a general Torchwood vibe that is always there, but the show is very willing to put you off your feet and can sweep you off your feet even, and just can, like you say, reconfigure the premise. And I think that's very exciting, and you get really engaged because I'm not going to get bored because I know everything might change. I got to enjoy this time as I'm watching, enjoy these characters, because this character may well die. Well, I know Jack's going to die all the time, but no one's particularly safe on Torchwood, and that includes the premise of the show, and that's a really, really cool thing. Absolutely.
Wow, just like Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
I don't know that joke. Just really, really quickly touching on something, because I kind of moved on from it there, but I just want to make a point. I liked how Owen and Tosh, another death scene, I really liked that they died separately. Still in contact, but they died separately, because that's like an extra sort of thing. Like, now they'll point they missed each other, and I like that even in death they were kind of, you know, they were in contact, but they were far apart. You know, I thought that was a really good sort of way to handle it. It would have been a different sort of feel to it if, for example, for whatever reason, however that could have played out, if they'd like died in each other's arms, because in a way that would be like completing their sort of, not fully, but it would bring some sort of closure to that sort of romantic arc they had. So to have them die separately was also really powerful. But I like what you say about the sort of Torchwood shaking things up a bit, and also I like the idea that nobody's really safe, and it's weird because the show sort of prepares you for Owen and Tosh's deaths in a way, because it makes the point. I mean, first of all, you see Susie die really, really early on in series 1, first episode in fact. But it's like the whole idea, like the whole death by Torchwood thing, and the sort of continued idea that everyone in Torchwood, like, nobody expects to like reach retirement age.
Yeah,
and stuff.
That's said outright in To the Last Man. I forget which character says it, but someone says they all do. They all die young, eventually.
Yeah. So it does sort of prepare you for those, like Owen and Tosh like dying, because in a way it's kind of ridiculous to assume that there is going to be a complete happy ending here, because the job they're doing is inherently dangerous, and Russell T Davies makes the point in one of the Declassifieds. He says that it wouldn't feel real, the danger wouldn't feel real unless there was, you know, the threats wouldn't feel significant if there wasn't consequences to it. So it was necessary to have those consequences. It was necessary, I think, to have that shake-up of the format. Because Torchwood, in a way, even though it does change things up like Doctor Who does have a status quo that it reverts back to. You know, it shakes things up, but it only shakes things up for a little while. And even though it will shake things up in the sense that, it changes the cast out and the new Doctor, new companions and stuff, they will eventually get back to the Monster of the Week adventure and sort of thing. Whereas Torchwood, and we'll get into this in Series 3, if you've watched Series 3 you'll know what I mean, it does change the format significantly. Even going from Series 1 to Series 2, the format changes, you know, not hugely, but it is sort of there, in a sense. But Torchwood really sticks to its guns when it changes the format, I feel.
I mean, it literally changes the format from Series 4 to Series 5. It goes from television to radio play, audio drama. So very literal change of the format eventually.
Yeah. But I do like the whole idea when it shakes things up, it does commit to it, in a way that you could argue that Doctor Who doesn't, which isn't a bad thing. Like, each method has its own sort of merits. Shut up. Each method does have its own merits. It is good to have sort of like these differences, but I do like the way Torchwood approaches it, where the consequences are felt. You know, even years down the line, the consequences are still felt, which is good, and good from a character standpoint as well. So, if
we just we grassed over to, is that even a verb? No, we touched over. That doesn't work either. We touched on. Glossed? We touched on To the Last Man briefly. Actually, it's probably like my third or fourth favorite episode of the series, but it's just kind of, it's very much out of time for Tosh instead of Owen, if you know what I mean. But it's really good, strong character stuff. The kind of surrogate relationship, Tommy is like the well, it's kind of like what Zombie Owen is to Tosh. She needs a kind of safe version of her boyfriend. That works really well, and I like how Tommy's just constantly disappointed. How, you know, every year you say, I'm going to do this year, I'm going to do that, and because he only sees her like annually, he sees she never really does any of those things. She's very stuck in a rut. It's all very strong character stuff, and Tosh's actress is so good. It's so great when she gets stuff to play. If I've a big complaint with the first two series, it's maybe that Owen got a lot of range to play eventually, and all the other characters basically do, or maybe not Yanto as much till Series 3, but Tosh's actress really, really shines when she's given interesting and more stuff to do, and I wish she'd gotten more things. But I guess that's the thing you always want to leave people wanting more. And I like that series 1 and 2, I know all three of us have kind of expressed, wouldn't it have been good if there was, a series in the middle that didn't quite blow up the show as much as series 2, but was kind of a bit neater than series 1, but had all the same characters. That's always a good thing to yearn for. I wish there was more of that, rather than, oh man, that show just kept going, didn't it? It's a very, very good thing.
Thank God for Big Finish.
Yeah, but that's a very, very, very germane to that point. But to the last man, always a war somewhere, says Tommy, and it's not a nice romantic night of sex Tommy and Tosh have together, and how Jack, says they should go and do that. Yanto asking Jack if he'd go back to his time if he could, and Jack saying no. It's like he says in another episode as well, who I am. He says it in Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. It's what is right here, right now, is what really matters. He's less lonely and more alive here because of Torchwood, and that kind of ties into blah blah blah, the Tosh stuff. Good episode. There's not as much subtext to it, but it's all very good character stuff. Very likable episode. I really enjoy that one.
I thought it was a solid episode, and I did enjoy it. I've got to be honest, I don't think it stood out for me in any significant way, but there were some really good scenes and really good Tosh scenes and stuff. As a whole, the concept is interesting, like a person when they wake up, once every year and stuff. I did like that, but on the whole, it's not like it's one that really, like I said, stands out. It's just individual scenes, and I thought Tosh was great in it. I always like seeing more of Tosh and everything. She has a great character, but yeah, and I really loved the sort of story allowed insight into Jack as well, which was really lovely, because you could have sort of easily made it just about Tosh in a way. It didn't necessarily have to have that sort of extra insight, but it did, and it was played so well. And more Jack and Yanto content, yay!
I don't know if you guys are wrapping to a conclusion as much as me, but I only have one big point really left to make, so I'm going to make it now. Unless Gig is a really hot take on To the Last Man, do you?
Well, just the waking up once a day every year thing is a bit Moffatian, isn't it? It's like Christmas Carol on steroids. Yeah. Also, one actually important thing is that it kind of steals a thing from Captain Jack Harkness of a guy from the past who has to go back to his death tomorrow, and it's very tragic, because we already know it's going to happen because the time must be kept how it is. There you go. What are you going to say?
It's like a mix-up of Catherine Tregenna's 2 episodes from Series 1, At a Time, and Captain Jack Harkness. It's like the concepts stuck together and then tell it to Tosh. What you reminded me of, saying it was Moffatian, is the premise of the episode is based on what a writer called James Goss, who eventually becomes like the showrunner for the 5th and 6th series of the show, which live only as audio dramas. But way back in 2007-ish, he was handling like the writing for the Torchwood website, which, had little in-universe facts about Torchwood, and he had a little case file about this frozen soldier Torchwood had to wake up once a year for whatever reason. And the writer, I don't know if it was Russell T Davies or Chris Chibnall that went, we should make this an episode, or the writer themselves for To the Last Man, but they took that idea and they really developed that kernel into an episode of its own, which is a pretty cool genesis for a story, I think.
See, that's the kind of cool thing that having like an expanded world for a show ought to do, have these little connections, stuff like that. Yeah. And actually developing on small ideas into bigger, interesting ones, rather than the sort of let's plunder everything to churn out endless,
Yeah. Here's the interesting. My big last point is the opposite of that. It's something not plundered and not dealt with that I find really weird in this. And I'm not spoiling future series because I'm talking totally in the context of series 2. This not happening is what irritates me and I find so bizarre. Gwen never actually confessed that she cheated with Owen on Rhys. We never get a scene of this. And so much of this series is based on the developing and improving nature of Gwen and Rhys' relationship and how they're never telling each other lies, and that I feel like we really needed, how like in last series we said the Jack and Yanto relationship really had a big hole in it that had to get filled by, an audio drama years later. I really feel like we should have had an episode touch on this, but if not, we should get, some kind of story, whether be it a book or an audio drama or whatever, covering this, because I think it's really crucial that Gwen tells Rhys that she cheated on him, and I really need to see Rhys' reaction and how they got past this, because I can't brook that Gwen didn't tell him. That does not work with the themes of this series at all to me, but I don't think it's not something small enough that it should just be implied. Like, I really need to have seen this happen in this series specifically, and it irritates me we didn't get that.
It would have made it more sort of powerful in a way, like if it happens before the wedding and everything, because it would show then like sort of Rhys's forgiveness and stuff, and how communication, like he didn't, for example, if she told him and it led to like a sort of breakdown in their relationship, that would be absolute shit. But if it happened before the wedding and then they, you know, then you still have everything else the same, you just have an extra scene or even an episode or something sort of dealing with the fallout of that, would have been good. And again, it would have been sort of added into this sort of series 2 theme of communication. It's a shame that we didn't
It's such
get
a
that.
monumentally bad thing to do. Like, I get Gwen's motivations for it, but it's really bad to the extent it's almost like I kind of subconsciously put it aside in my head, because like this isn't necessarily something she should have been forgiven for, arguably. It's like such a, yeah, so it's, maybe it's just a case of they didn't address it because they didn't really want to address it, you know, in the context of what they were doing this series. But they wrote it, so you got to deal with it. You can't just ignore it.
It's not just that she cheated, you know, she drugged him and wiped his memory of her confession to him as well. That's even worse. She compounded the wrong she did to him, but she also, doing that kind of let her get away scot-free with it, which is troubling, isn't it? Yeah, she seemed like tormented by the guilt of that after she'd done it, with the whole pizza of shame and crying while trying to eat the pizza. So it is weird that they don't pick that up in season 2 again.
I'm absolutely spent for opinions now, but you guys go off. What do you guys got? Have you got anything? And there's no reason to cheer at me saying that.
One little thing. Dead Man Walking. I loved the callback to day 1 where Owen has a shot that's close up on his face, exactly like Karis in walking around seeing the porn advertisements.
Yeah,
Owen walks around the club
like
and he's got a shot exactly like that. That was a nice homage. Okay, that's basically probably the most interesting thing I have left to comment on.
Torchwood is good. I like Torchwood. That's my ultimate opinion. The end. Series 2 is good. There you go. The end.